All right, welcome everyone tonight. Tonight we have a special joint meeting between the Easttown and Township Boards of Supervisors. So thank you, Easttown, for joining us tonight. As usual, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and I am going to hand things over to Dr. Robert Andrews, who is going to give us the Phase 2 study presentation on fire EMS.
Good evening, everybody. Let's go ahead and bring up the slide on the screen if we can, please. Okay, so a couple things. Yeah, so here's what's going to happen. I like to look at people, and I'll have to do that by being into the mic, because I know that you can't hear it, and apparently they can on Zoom, so they've already cautioned me to try and do this, even though I feel like I'm hiding. Move it up a little bit? Okay. Is that better? No. I'm sorry? Well, this is a light, I think. So, well, anybody in the control room can help with that? Is that better? I know, but I don't know why. Well, let's give this this is the only mic I have, so let's give it a second, and we want you to hear, of course. Well, we're off to a smooth start.
We didn't see the Zoom in last week's meeting. Oh, yeah?
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing, testing, testing. Okay, I'll do the best I can.
Can you hear this? Yes?
Okay, so can we turn that down? Let's just take that off. Ma'am, can you hear this now? Oh, great, okay. Alrighty then, here we go. So it's hard to believe it's been 20 weeks since we were last together. March the 8th was our joint public meeting. And a lot's happened in 20 weeks. One of the things that hasn't changed is I have a great group of 20 stakeholders that have helped me over this process. The members of the Board of Supervisors, members of the fire companies, members of the township staffs. So it's been a good cross-functional group. And again, the quality of my work is attributable to their honesty, their candor, and their willingness to help me understand what's been going on here. It's a very complicated process. There are lots of options and lots of things going on, and I could not have done that without them. So again, thanks to the stakeholders. Basically, there are two things that are in the board package, the agenda package. Two things are there. One is our Phase 2 study report, which is a letter format that's addressed to Joe DeRocco. And then there are PowerPoints in 5 different appendices. And one is a repeat of the Phase 1 study report. There's a career staffing model, a fleet plan, a facility plan, a recommended district structure, and then a district decision and implementation plan. So the way we like to do our reports, we don't think it's particularly helpful to give someone a 300-page telephone book-sized report. Nobody wants to read them. We think it's more effective to have a summary letter that kind of talks about the news, how we conducted the study, what the major findings are. And then for more information, go to the appropriate appendice or the appendix where you can learn more about that. So that just tends to be the way that we like to do our report. You'll find all of that online on both townships in the Board of Supervisors agenda package. What made it later than that is the PowerPoint that's below it, or actually, hold on a second here, sorry. So what's happened is I have an abbreviated slide deck I'm going to do today because I'm limited to my 45 minutes. I'm going to try to honor that. So on the website is also an abbreviated package, and those are the slides I'm using this evening. So just so you know, you have access to all of that from the Board of Supervisors website. Again, the study took part in 2 phases. Phase 1, basically we started work around December 20th of last year. The public presentation was made on March the 8th of 2023. Many of you were here. We then spent 20 weeks doing a detailed analysis, and basically this is basically being presented. That should be phase 2, but that should be that's being done today. I want to go over some of the things we did in phase 1 because some of you may not have been there in the first meeting. One is it's important that we remember the history of firefighting in America, in particular what's happened here in Tredyffrin and Easttown. It's worth going over again before we get into the phase 2 operation. Again, based in England, started because of Ben Franklin. The volunteer fire service culture is very strong here. It remains very strong in the area. Berwyn Fire Company was formed in 1894, and again have been providing fire service for over 100 years. Paoli Fire Company was formed just after that, 114 years ago in 1909. So fire service delivery is being done by your 2 fire companies. They are supported by Radnor Fire Company in a sort of a different way, but Radnor Fire Company has a stipend from Tredyffrin Township, and they take care of basically the panhandle part of the far southeast part of Tredyffrin Township. EMS service was started in 1941 by Paoli Fire Company, and basically, again, there's a picture there in 1951, the Ladies Auxiliary raised money to purchase a Cadillac ambulance. So they've been doing EMS basically since 1941. Part of what's going on here is that volunteerism in the fire service is declining. If you look at the way the fire companies were back when they were first formed, even back as far as the early 60s, late 60s, early 70s, they had very robust staffing. They had a lot of members, and basically it is now declining. And that's true across America. That isn't just happening in the Philadelphia area, that's happening everywhere where there are volunteers. It's just the nature of societal changes. And so this is one of the things that, again, we determined in the phase 1 study that this is really just a fact. Why are they going away? Well, some cases it's societal change. The volunteer fire companies are no longer the center of the community, which is what they were, back in the day. In general, volunteerism is decreasing. We have a society now where sometimes people would, example, if you were a church person, it might be easier to write a check to the church than necessarily go on a mission trip to Honduras and go dig a water well. So we do have in some cases that volunteers, that support is there, but not necessarily in labor. It may be there financially, but not in labor. And firefighting is hard manual labor. There are easier ways to volunteer. Community changes as well. We talked about this last time. As Paoli, as Berwyn, as things grew up, we had a very hometown base of operation. I call it the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. They were here, and then there was a big fire whistle on top of the firehouse, and it would go, and that would mean it's time to close up shop and run down to the firehouse and pick up the fire truck and go careening through the streets to go help people. That kind of changed as we started becoming more of an urban area. There's a reason why they created the Paoli Local. That was to take people into Center City to go to work. And so as that happened, volunteers weren't available in some cases during the daytime. because they were all in Center City. So you started having some issues there. And as you have a blue-collar and a white-collar workforce, you had people before that were pretty much tradespeople. That's what they did. They worked with their hands. And they tended to be, it wasn't exclusive. There were a lot of other people, professionals and bankers and such that also were volunteers. But I think in general terms, people that tend to be mechanically inclined, tend to like to be volunteer firefighters. And as that begins to change, some of that has changed. And then you have an issue where as people come into the area that weren't here before, they don't even know there is a volunteer fire company. I'd like to run a survey someday and ask just citizens at random, two questions. One, is your fire department paid or volunteer? And two, if it was volunteer, would you be interested? And I think we'd be surprised to find out that people aren't even aware. Even though we have fund drives and we have a turkey raffle and we sell Christmas trees at Christmas time and we do those kinds of things, I don't know that for the 60,000 people or so that make up Tredyffrin Easttown Townships, everybody knows that they have a volunteer fire department. Again, why are they going away? Changes in the family of the home, single parent homes, 2-worker households, homeschooling. Now that there are a lot more two individuals working out of the same place. Maybe before somebody stayed home to take care of the kids. Well, if they're both working, somebody can't take off to the firehouse and leave the kids alone. Well, if both people are working, they can't do that. In some cases, inflation's happening now, people are working multiple jobs. They may not have the chance to do volunteer work. And there are a lot of pressures on volunteers, training requirements, medical and physical standards, the amount of call volume and that sort of thing. So this is what had happened, and how was it addressed? Well, starting in the 1980s, the fire companies began hiring career staff. Now we say career, call them paid or call them part-time or full-time, but basically that's what occurred, and that continues today. That's what's happening. The gap has been filled by the fire companies hiring career firefighters. Which kind of brings us to where we are today, and I think it's important that, and this is where we left it. Tredyffrin Easttown has developed a fire service-based ALS and BLS EMS system. So ALS is advanced life support. They're the paramedics that shock your heart and do the drugs and that kind of thing, in the purest sense. And BLS are the EMTs that do a level of basic work before the paramedics get there. And they're cross-trained as firefighter, EMTs, and paramedics. So if you noticed in the pictures there, in one case for Paoli up in the upper left, the folks are in their paramedic response gear, and they jump into a phone booth, and then they come out as firefighters, and they're all ready to go do that as well. It's very important that people understand that. Continually, I'm asked, and people will ask, well, gee, should we not separate the EMS service from the fire service? And we'll get to that in a minute, but when you do that, in other words, firefighters can do EMS work, but EMS people can't do fire work. It kind of goes in one direction. So if you wind up removing the head count that do the EMS work, it really does sort of decimate the fire service capability. So it's not without consequences. I understand the question. It's a question that always comes up, but in this particular model. And what happened was we said in this model that was the model we would maintain for phase 2 of the study. So phase 2 of the study is basically trying to fix the system that's in place and address that. And we did not talk about what would happen or what the consequences or what any kind of consequence would be of removing EMS from the fire department. What this just shows is that call volumes are increasing. It's sort of an eye exam, but basically you have both Berwyn and Paoli Fire Companies there. You have a combined total by year, and it kind of talks about, is it an EMS call or a fire call? And all it really just basically says is that even after the pandemic, we still see calls increasing. And again, that's stressing the system. EMS calls alone, projected, we'll have to see. 2023, we're now 6 months in, 7 months in. And we'll have to see how that trends. There is a possibility that could begin to flatten out. My prediction is not very good about that. But at the moment, it seems as though, especially people are getting older, the baby boomers are getting older, that's putting stress on medical calls and those kinds of things. And I think that's going to occur. Basically, in 2022, the combined fire calls in the 2 townships was almost 1,500 fire calls. EMS calls were almost 5,500. These are not small numbers. And of course, in the old days when I was with East Whiteland Fire Company and we ran 300 calls a year, we thought that was a big deal. And now we're seeing much bigger numbers than that. It is true that there are fewer numbers of fire calls than EMS calls, but there's a much more manpower-dependent activity. So while you have fewer calls, it takes a lot more people to deal with the emergency. And so the key is not to get lured into that trap of what do we do. The core problem, basically, at the end of phase one was that the number of volunteers is decreasing, the number and duration of the EMS calls is increasing, and the current method of funding is not sustainable. That was the net at the end of phase one. We identified 8 problems. You may call them opportunities, challenges, problems. I'll let you use the word. Things that need to be addressed. One is that the Ben Franklin volunteer-based fire EMS model is just not sustainable anymore. It just isn't. The entire Commonwealth is under the same level of stress. So you can't look to Upper Merion, or you can't look somewhere else and say, well, they'll come help, because they're having the same problems we're having here in TE. A fundamental shift to a career fire and EMS employee system supplemented by qualified volunteers. This is the inverse. Okay, it started out where it was mostly volunteer, and you started then bringing in career staff. This is the inverse of that. It's going to start being more and more career-oriented, supported by volunteers. It's just basically turning the model upside down. Career personnel need to provide staffing, standard staffing, 24/7, 365. And right now, that doesn't always happen. You don't have full around-the-clock coverage all the time. And so at some point, we need to look at working on that. The fire station facilities need to be reviewed and modernized. Increased funding will be required to support the current and the future fire EMS operation. In conjunction with the necessary funding, a new oversight management structure needs to be established. We'll talk about what that might look like in a little bit. And the new oversight management structure should develop a comprehensive performance standard so that everybody gets measured the same way and the citizens understand what they're getting for their money and whether or not our response metrics are getting better, getting worse, staying the same. So that's where we were then. Before we get into some of the phase 2 piece will be about this career model thing. And I wanted to just mention some terminology, which again we settled on at the end of phase 1. One is this notion of a 4-person engine company. National standards are there that say in general terms, the accepted national standard is there should be 4 qualified people on an engine company, call it a fire engine, fire truck, ladder truck, and that they should be responsible for a minimum of 4 people. On an MICU, here you like to call that a mobile intensive care unit. Back where I come from, we call them medic units, but kind of all the same thing. Here, the standard practice is 1 firefighter paramedic and 1 firefighter EMT. So we talk about standard staffing. I'll talk about 2-person medic units or ambulances and 4-person engine companies. The other thing we talk about are some personnel staffing terminology. One is called the platoon system. A platoon is basically a group of firefighters that work together. In general terms, in this area today, there are 2 models of that. There's a 3-platoon system and there's a 4-platoon system. They both get the job done. There's some pros and cons for both of those. But in general terms, I'm going to talk about moving to a 3-platoon system. But the term platoon is just simply, what is the shift schedule? How many days is it? Do you work every 4th day or do you work every 3rd day is what that basically means. And then the shift is the hours on the clock you work. So right now, some of the fire companies operate a 12-hour shift, maybe 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. They may work a 10-hour shift. They do have some people working a 24-hour shift. They're doing the best they can to match the staffing with the problem, and based upon their current income stream and what they can do. So I just wanted to kind of introduce some terms that if you were here at the last meeting, you might remember, but I wanted to refresh your memory. So before I get into that, there's a story I want to tell you about. Okay, it's always time for a story. So basically, I want to tell you about my adventure that began at 4 o'clock in the morning, yesterday morning, when I left my house in San Antonio to get on an airplane. Now the story ends that I got here right before lunch today. Let me help you with the math. That's 30 hours to get from San Antonio, Texas to Berlin. Okay? So 5:15 in the morning, I'm hearing that, hey, planes get later as the day goes on, earlier flight, you have a better chance of making it. 5:15, United Airlines, bless their hearts, cancels my flight. 5:15 in the morning for operational issues. You know what that means? The crew timed out. They didn't have enough sleep, but that's what that meant, okay? So now they say, so instead of going through Houston, which is my preference, they want to send me to my favorite airport in the world, which is Chicago O'Hare. So they're going to send me to Chicago. Okay. I have now I go from 11 o'clock lunchtime arrival to a 9 p.m. arrival with a connection with plenty of time in Chicago. So my phone keeps going off, flight delayed, flight delayed, flight delayed, flight delayed, to where it's like, I'm not going to make my connection. And I don't want to live in Chicago overnight. So knowing that United Airlines has failed me, I then buy a new first class ticket, because that's all that's left. Got to be here. Okay, so I get, on United, where I take off on time from San Antonio to get to Dallas. Plane comes in, parks, everybody gets off. And then two guys in safety vests and flashlights. And if you fly enough, you know they're mechanics. You know, they're the people you don't want to see coming to your airplane. Okay, so they go on board, and I'm saying, this is going to be 5 minutes, or we're not going. They push it back 20 minutes, they push it back 20 minutes, they push it back. I said, and they finally cancel it. Now they said, we're trying to find another airplane. It's DFW Airport. They have plenty of airplanes at DFW. American Airlines does. So they cancel the flight. Okay. So 10 o'clock at night, get in line with 150 people for your hotel voucher, then try and get on a shuttle bus, go to a fairly seemly hotel. Horrible experience. This morning, I get up, it's like pre-pandemic. Flight's on time, I get to Philly 10 minutes late. So what we had is, on Sunday, we had a mess, and on Monday, it was fine. The thing that was so important, what's your point? The thing that was so important about this is that the things that people complained about was this. Didn't anybody see this coming? Nobody's surprised. You know, we have a retirement age for pilots that's mandatory. We laid off a bunch of pilots because of the pandemic and the bailout. We got rid of a lot of, I'm not talking about a vaccine, whether you need it or not, but the point is a lot of air traffic controllers got fired because they didn't take the vaccine. They now need 300 air traffic controllers, and the entire system is under stress. And at 5 o'clock yesterday morning, you couldn't move through the airport for all the families that are traveling. And this system can't keep up with it. So the big comment was, didn't anybody see this coming? Okay, so we're going to shift from that for a second to two things. One is going to be human nature, and the other thing is going to be where political science meets human nature. What's human nature? We don't like to do what's uncomfortable. Okay, we all know diet and exercise is good for us, and we'll probably do it for some of us after our first heart attack. We might even do diet and exercise after our second heart attack. But in general terms, we as humans don't like to do things that are uncomfortable. Democracy in America is messy. Dictatorships and absolute monarchies are much more efficient forms of government than a democracy is. And part of the problem with democracies are you have so many constituents that all have different agendas, and you have elected officials like the board who try to do the best they can to make the right decisions. Part of what I don't want to see happen is 2 or 3 years from now, we have a major failure in the fire and EMS system that isn't occurring right this minute, but we're headed that way. And have somebody come up and say, you know, how come nobody told us? How come we didn't know? How come people didn't see this coming? So what's going to happen next is I'm going to try to give you some ideas of what I'm suggesting you look at. Again, look at, plan's not perfect. It's full of options. My job was to basically provide the supervisors with information that they needed so that they could make informed decisions and informed choices. And if they don't like my recommendations, they have plenty to choose from. If they think the timing is too aggressive, they have plenty of ways to do that. But what I would hate to see for a township that's had this level of commitment for so long is that 3 or 4 years have the fire and EMS system replicate anything that looked like the airline system yesterday. So that's kind of the pitch for that. So we did benchmarking. That's one of the things we did. One of the things I told the supervisors I would do was give them unit costing on what a typical person cost, a captain, a paramedic, what an engine company cost, and that sort of thing, because at some point they don't know what things will cost if I didn't do that. We started by doing that by saying, with career staff, do we have a benchmark or at least a budget we can build based upon what we thought was a competitive pay range? I will tell you, if there's anything that's common about the fire and EMS payroll and system in this area, is there's nothing common. So we looked at that and said, rather than trying to go through and look at some kind of a post-mortem, we just felt like we'd much rather present a better system moving forward than to try and build this looking backwards, because it's just all over the place. And a lot of those agreements may be 30 years old, and they incorporate agreements that were done and political deals that were cut, and a lot of these things happen. They're legacy things, but they're not the kind of thing you'd want to replicate in the new system here. So East Whiteland Township, I felt, was the best comparator of everyone we looked at. They're a municipal fire department. We'll talk about that in a second. They had a very easy to understand collective bargaining agreement. They employed company officers. We call them captains. They have a 3-platoon system, 24 hours on duty, 48 hours off duty. You have a Kelly Day in there, and what that does is that helps bring down the work week. And basically it's 48 hours a week times 52 weeks. So they work a 2,496-hour year. Now the 4-platoon system, people now don't do that. So this would be an increase in hours. And there would probably need to be some form of increase in compensation to make up for that. But in general, a 3-platoon system works for some reasons we'll get into later. It's important to know that East Whiteland doesn't provide ALS ambulance service. They just do EMTs and basic. So even at that, while I like the agreement, they don't serve the same level of service you do here in Tredyffrin and Easttown. You offer a higher level of service here. So as I said, there is some part of the art, not just the science of how we looked at this. And again, I think that we looked at them as the most competitive employer from a pay and benefit standpoint. Upper Providence Township we liked as the second best comparator. For a lot of the reasons that are stated there. You can read that on your own. However, in this particular case, Upper Providence does not provide any EMS service at all. It's a fire department only operation. And I think what happens is, for anyone who says, well, you know, what if we looked at that? Well, you can look at Good Fellowship Ambulance as an example. Okay, well, Good Fellowship Ambulance does not run, and they're a big operation. Well, the question is, if you look at Good Fellowship Ambulance as a budget, but then you don't look at the 3 fire companies in Westchester, Fame, Goodwill, and First, and yet the cost of the citizens are running a separate fire department, you really don't have a good, clear picture of what the total cost is. So I just bring that up for that reason. We looked at Paoli and Berwyn primarily because obviously they're providing the service. They have career staff. Both of those agencies do not have a collective bargaining agreement. The additional organizations reviewed: Downingtown, Easttown, Freedom Valley Medical, Lower Merion, Norristown, Northampton, Philadelphia, Phoenixville. You can read the rest. We had a fairly detailed review trying to get a sense of what is sort of the benchmark. If we're trying to be a competitive employer, what would that be? Because I needed to do that so that I could start to do unit pricing to build a personnel budget to provide to the boards of supervisors. 5 models for career staffing. Now, this is guided by something called NFPA 1710. I'm going to get to that for a second. Right now there are 3 fire stations operating and protecting TE. Station 1 is owned by Tredyffrin Township. It's on Valley Forge Road. Station 2, you would know, is Berwyn's Firehouse on Bridge Avenue. Station 3 is Paoli's Fire Company's station on Darby Road. So just to get us all remember where the fire stations are. Basically what we did is we looked at staffing models, but before that, there is something called NFPA 1710. It is a national standard for the operations of career fire departments. And as you see there, there's 4 criteria: single family dwelling, an open air strip shopping center, an apartment initial full assignment, and a high rise initial full assignment capability. And high rise is 7 stories. High rise doesn't have to be a skyscraper in downtown Philadelphia. You have some 7-story buildings here. And so this is pretty proven science. It's a national standard. It talks about the number of people that really should be deployed on the first alarm to deal with these emergencies. So at some point I'd say, you can argue with me if you want to. I'd rather argue with the NFPA and the national standard, but I'll stand for questions with this question time. But it begins at 16, 27, and 42 people. Option A is the most expensive option. It's the largest option. And this is, again, career staffing, 4 people on an engine, 2 people on a medic unit. In this case, the red Tahoe in the upper right-hand corner is a battalion chief that would get 2. This is just it's just a model. And it involves having a manned engine company in each of the 3 stations and a manned ambulance in 2 of the stations and 2 ambulances on Bridge Avenue. Now you would say, why? There are times when routinely 4 ambulances in the 2 townships are all busy. This isn't necessarily just a case of the closest ambulance goes. There is a case in some cases where the call volume is such that they're all busy. Option B takes away the 1 ambulance on Bridge Avenue and it removes the battalion chief. So as the options go down, the staffing goes down. Option C1, we take the engine company, in this case, away from Bridge Avenue. C1 and C2 are the same. Option C2, the engine basically leaves from Paoli and it goes over Bridge Avenue. So which engine company gets staffed? I can leave that to the township supervisors to discuss based upon their constituencies, where they'd want that to go, along with the fire companies. But the option C1 and C2 has the same economic cost. And again, I told them what I would do is give you an idea of what costing is so you can make some decisions knowing if you delete this, if you add that, this is sort of the neighborhood you're in on costing. Option D, we have 1 engine company at Station 2. Why Station 2? We think yellow is clearer than red? No. It's a Station 2 because Station 2 is the most centrally located to the district. At some point, it's about response time, and it's basically about where things need to be. It isn't about brand loyalty. It just is, where do things need to be so that we have a better chance of response time to the greatest number of people between the 2 townships. So there are the 5 options. If you look at them, only option A and B meet the first 2 criteria for NFPA 1710. The others do not. Now, you would ask, well, why not? And the answer would be, well, there's some things we don't know. One, there is a budget consideration. At some point, there's a limit. And at some point, what I'm going to request is probably stretching the system, what I'm recommending. So there's no reason to take this any further. The other thing is that I still think there's a great opportunity for volunteer recruiting, and I think to do things for volunteer retention. And to some degree, those volunteers can also make up that person complement. So they don't have to all be fully paid people. And I think it's too soon to make a determination on that. So that's one of the reasons why. Am I comfortable saying this? I think I am for where we are at the moment. If you look at wages and salary progression, based upon this, and again, some of this is based upon the collective bargaining agreement from East Whiteland, along with looking at the other organizations we benchmarked, a firefighter 1 would, again, on an average basis, make $76,000 a year. A firefighter 2, which is also a driver operator, would make $89,000 a year. A captain, which is a company officer, at $110,000. And then we're recommending a new supervisory job, maybe not to be filled right away, but to be identified as a battalion chief at $127,000, let's call it. So again, this was part of that. Now this is that straight salary without benefits. And we'll get to benefits in just a second. But this does show a rank structure and a general average cost of a person, because at some point you have to start somewhere. If you look at what an engine company costs then, an engine company for a shift is about $368,000. And a medic unit is $182,000, and a battalion chief is $233,000. So if you look at, to put 4 personnel on an engine company, what's it going to cost? Our model says about $368,000 before benefits. Because at some point before now, the supervisors have said, we hear you, but we don't know what the consequences are, and nobody's really told us what the menu is going to cost. And so this is part of what we said we would do. Presuming we go this way, there gets to be a question of how do we do grandfathering of employees? We currently have career employees at Paoli Fire Company, we have career employees at Berwyn Fire Company. If we think that they may want to move to a new district, to a new township, or a new district government model, well, there's some things you have to do. There's some very senior people at Berwyn, as an example. They have 30 years of service. Well, if anybody's worked anywhere for 30 years, guess what? You get a lot more vacation and a lot more time off than if you have 5 years of service. And so all of these things kind of go into that. There's a question, too, of what happens if we hire people from outside the system. We have someone that wants to hire on. We want to hire more people, let's say, and we need to go outside the area. Well, if somebody comes in from a neighboring fire department and they have 20 years on the job, are we going to make them go back to having 2 weeks of vacation a year like they were a brand new employee? Or are we going to have to somehow meet them? These are all questions that I don't have an answer to, but they're things we need to consider. And as we go down the path of making this real and really starting to say, Bob, that may be a nice economic model, but how much of that is going to hold up? These are some of the things that we have to address. The plan is that for us to, the marketplace for firefighter paramedics in the area is very tight. There's a supply and demand problem. There's a lot more of a supply for more career fire and EMS people than there are supply. And so like anything else, if you're trying to attract people to your particular workplace, you do that by being a preferred employer. So competitive pay and benefits, excellent equipment and stations, a rank structure where there's promotability. If I tap out, if I'm a step 5 firefighter and I can't promote anymore because there's no place to promote to, well then the rest of my life I'm going to get my cost of living increase of maybe 2% a year, whatever cost of living is. But I'm not going to make the promotion. I'm not going to make the 5% on top of that because I have more of a merit or I have more of a competency. The idea of having captains and battalion chiefs, to some degree, if we had those things, I think people that are currently working in other fire departments in the area that don't have that promotability or that promotion opportunity could basically maybe come here. And again, some of this we just have to try and test in the marketplace, but you can't test it in the marketplace until we have some policy agreement as to what we want to do. What I say we, I've been working on this for 7 months, so I feel like I'm as part of we as anybody, but obviously you, it's not my fire department, it's not my township, but I say we as a figure of speech. Okay, so this just says from option A, which was the full meal deal. That's the one that had all the engine companies manned and the battalion chief. And there I have added the benefits. So we assume 30%. Now, it may not be 30% for everybody because if you're a 30-year employee, your benefit structure may be a little bit higher. Maybe not, but if you look at it, the cost of salaries and benefits runs from about $3.5 million on option D up to $8 million on option A. You have option B and C. Now, there are a couple things here that I didn't get into. I just said here that these are the salaries. We know that there currently is money being spent by the fire companies now. The question would be, well, if the townships or if the district was to take up these employees, then we'd expect that some of that funding would come back with the employees. We wouldn't expect the fire companies to keep the money and then have the district pick up the employees. So I've not factored that in. That becomes future budget workshop things. This is where, once we know more, you get into the weeds and deal with this in a workshop. In some cases, in particular for Paoli Fire Company, just because of where they are, 34% of their call volume is not done in Easttown and Tredyffrin. Typically, it's Willistown Township, then Malvern, and others. I think for the policymakers, for the boards, the question of how do we not subsidize another municipality? If we go do what we have to do, and Paoli's the benefactor of that, and we put extra people in their station, does Willistown just to get a free ride? Or do they have to say, well, look, it's time for you to sort of up your contribution so that your contribution is proportionate to what the other two townships are? And back when I said democracies are messy, that's one of those places where democracies are messy. Okay, because you can't edict that. That's got to be an agreement. But there are some, but again, back to the model, there are a couple things here that you need to know about. Berwyn Fire Company's call volume is about 13% outside the district. On the recommended fleet plan, what we basically said is that both fire company fleets appear to be in a good, well cared for condition. They have a fire apparatus ambulance rebuild replacement program. They do that all the time. They're always mindful. Fire trucks typically can last between 20 and 30 years. They're very expensive. They're a long life asset, a long-lived asset. I can tell you now that when I grew up, if a fire truck was $150,000, it was a lot of money. They're now $800,000. A ladder truck was $700,000. They're now $2.4 million. It's just the way it is. They're very, very expensive. The good news is they should last a long time. You don't replace them every day, but it's an investment. Berwyn Fire Company has, by the way, this is an important piece. Right now, and again, I'm a native Pennsylvanian, so I acknowledge my heritage, but the Pennsylvania legislature and the laws are not always the most friendly, don't make the most sense. And one of the things here is that there's something called a volunteer firefighter relief fund. And what that is that somewhere somebody decided, for all the right reasons, all these laws are done for the right reason at the time. But most people don't pass a law saying, well, that's going to really suck. And they try and do a good job. But what happened was a way to try and get some of the fire companies money is they said, look, we're going to take a piece of everybody's property insurance premium, business or private, and we're going to take some of that and give it back to the fire companies. With the idea being, well, if the fire companies have more equipment, then it ought to reduce the losses and it ought to reduce the exposure to the fire insurance company. So it made sense, it was ethical, all that. Along the way, some of the strings that were put on that money remain today. So as an example, in a fully paid department, fire department, personnel costs are about 85% of the budget. In the wisdom of the Pennsylvania Relief Fund, most of that money cannot go to salaries. So while it's significant money, the one thing that everybody's trying to deal with is personnel, and the relief fund won't let you spend it. Okay, you saw the variation, it's about 3 to 1 on EMS calls versus fire calls. But because the state thinks that an ambulance is a money-making proposition, they won't let you spend relief money to buy an ambulance. So one of the things, and to have the relief money come in, you have to be a fire company that has volunteers. So one of the things about this is it's a fairly, the calculus of this is fairly interesting when you go to what you don't want to do as a community. You don't want to leave money on the table that you can get. And what needs to happen between the district as the government and the fire companies is we need to let the fire companies do what they do best, which they can do. And in some cases before they had a bunch of staff. And the townships need to come in and fund those things that the fire company can't fund. So that's kind of part of this. Berwyn Fire Company has a new fire truck on order. It's about $740,000, but again, that was ordered in 2021, so 2 years ago. So again, inflation's hitting the fire apparatus business like anything else. It intends to put that new fire engine at the Bridge Avenue station. And there's a drawing of what it looks like, except in color in real life would be, I think, probably white with the yellow stripe. I do have a recommended action addition to the fleet, Quint. What a Quint is, if you're not familiar with it kind of does both what a ladder truck does and it does what a pumper does. Now, I will tell you that if anybody wanted to put a lightning rod on their head in this business, you mess with the colors of fire trucks and you recommend a fire truck design, because the one you recommend, there will be torches and pitchforks headed your way to saying, I would never buy something like that. It's way too small. It should be 100 feet, not 70 feet. And you need to go off for drug testing, because we don't know why in the world you'd recommend such a thing. Well, here's the good news. We put the $2.3 million in there in case it winds up being a tandem axle platform. There's some reasons why we did that. But like I said, there are a couple of things that I attempted to do in the interest of, would this be interesting? And I got what I probably figured was an appropriate response from my fraternity and my sorority in the fire service. But anyway, that's the only thing that I felt was significant that we needed to add that wasn't currently being budgeted, that the fire companies may not be able to do on their normal replacement program if we let them use the money that they used to use for apparatus and not use it for personnel. At the moment, again, what's happened is I'm calling things TFED. I just had to come up with a name, the Tredyffrin Easttown Fire and EMS District. That's up for the solicitors and the commissioners of the board to come up with a name. I had to pick one, that's what I picked. TFED is easy to say. But right now, the distribution of what apparatus would go where, and I talked to all the chiefs. I talked to Chief Test and the others, and this is kind of where we kind of lay it out for right now. And like I said, there's plenty of apparatus. You'll notice, like an example, in Paoli, they have two engines. They have engine 3.1 and 3.5. Again, inside baseball, 5 inches is just a tanker that just carries more water. But the thing is, again, one of the reasons I didn't take the second engine out of the plan is we want the volunteers to have something to take to the fire. And again, back to that 1710 standard, where we were missing half the people, we don't need to get rid of the fire trucks right now. We can figure out if we have too many once we try and see what's going on with the new model and whether the volunteers are here and whether we can aggressively man them. So I think in some cases, this is a distribution. The only thing that was really missing, I felt, was the new Quint, and that's on the bottom left-hand corner. And again, part of this too, so again, I'm going to say this a couple times. I know that there's some discussion going on about where's the money going to come from. Okay, so obviously, Bob, this is great, but what's the ask going to be and where's the money going to come from? I've watched a lot of the public meetings in the last month or two or three, and I know that there's been discussion about an EIT. I know there's discussion about a fire tax. I know there's a discussion about raising property taxes. From what I could tell with public comments, what you, the citizens, said was, we kind of like the idea the closer we marry the income or the expense, but the more happy we are because we kind of know where that's going. But here's the deal. Unless I give the boards an economic target that says, here's how big how big an elephant you're dealing with, they really can't look at that, and if they want to assign a millage rate, to know what that would be. So some of this I've done on a high side to say, look, if we're going to do this, the last thing I want to have happen is pull my punches and give a low number because it would make me popular. Have them go out and come up with a new tax, find out in 2 years it's half as much as it needed to be, and say, we paid Dr. Bob all this money to do this consulting, and I really wish you would have just told us, because now we have to go back to the citizens a second time and then tell them why we're doing this. So just so my operation was to say, if you want to determine a millage rate, let me give you some budget ideas as a maximum number for you to consider to know what that looks like. Not that you have to take it, but I didn't feel that to be popular and minimizing the number would serve you well. So that's why I did what I did. Facility plan, there are 3 fire stations currently. TFED Station 1 is currently the district Boy Scout headquarters out on Valley Forge Road. You've all seen Tredyffrin Station 2, which is obviously Berwyn, and then Darby Road with Paoli. They're the 3 stations we talk about. If you haven't seen them lately, that's kind of what they look like today. During the 20-week period, we consulted with the fire companies to determine the current facility needs, as well as integrated the need for the increased facilities. Berwyn engaged Bernard and architects to modify the second floor plan. Now what happened was, when the consultant came along, I introduced this notion of needing more career staff in firehouses, and what that necessitated was new dormitory space for them to sleep in at nighttime. So I changed the model in study 1, and I went to both Berwyn and Paoli fire companies, and they went out and said, okay, well, I said, do you mind checking to see what this is going to cost if this happens? Berwyn has been working with the supervisors for some time for the Bridge Avenue replacement project. They did not have on their second floor enough dorm space. I asked them to look at that. They did. Paoli Fire Company, we talked to about several things. One of the things I want to mention about this is here's a quiz question. What's the percentage of cancer in firefighters that is higher than the normal population? What's the percentage? 30%. 30%. If you're a firefighter, you have a 30% more likely chance of getting cancer than the normal population. Well, what happened? Well, we had fire trucks in the building, and we started up, and all the diesel exhaust went around, and it made its way to the kitchen, it made its way to the bunk room, and we breathed diesel fume exhaust all the time. We would go out and fight a fire, and we'd get the soot on us, and all the chemicals and things that went with that. And in some cases, the dirtier the stuff, the tougher firefighter I was. So we didn't want to clean our helmet because we wanted our helmet to be charred black, and we wanted to be tough guys. Well, what we realized today is we were bringing all those carcinogens home with us. And we were living with them in the firehouse. And here's what's worse. If we were a volunteer and we had our turnout pants by the bed, we slept next to them every night. We slept next to those carcinogens. So what happened was I was asked, and Paoli Fire Company was asked, to look at their current facility to determine what do we need to do to address some of the firefighter health and safety issues with that. There's something called a red, green, and yellow zone. I won't bore you with it. But they're basically ways that you try to protect the firefighters from what is naturally dirty, what needs to be naturally clean. The place where you sleep and the place where you eat needs to be clean. Okay, where they back the fire truck in, you have a little more room for that, but then you put protection in. They went to the architects and they addressed those things, and that's part of what they did. And then for them to do what they had to do an addition. And then we looked at Valley Forge Road. So again, part of this is they did what I asked them to do. That's the part about they really helped me. Phase one, that's just what it is. I won't go over that. I'm getting short. This is what the metal building looks at the moment. Berwyn is operating out of there with an engine and 2 medic units. And they have about, $237,500 invested in the building. So they have put their money as well as wanting to be there. And again, 166 came from relief funds and 71.5 from company funds. To put a district headquarters out there, and this is something we have not done yet, these are some of the things that would need to happen. And so district offices, dormitory space for increased staffing, classroom and training support rooms, supply and storage, fitness and health rooms, and those kinds of things are not there now. The recommendation to do interior modifications to the building to get started, we're estimating at $2 million. That's 10,000 square feet at $200 a square foot. However, we should get an architect for that once we know what's going to be there. Now again, that's a conundrum, because you could say, well, we can't put career firefighters at every station. So maybe they go to Paoli and maybe they go to Station 2, but we don't put them in Valley Forge. Well, if you don't put them there, there's no need to spend money right away on dorm space. So a lot of the money goes around depending upon what do we pick and choose. You know, what does Easttown want to do? Because they're going to obviously want to have service to the Easttown Township. The different folks have a little more acreage to deal with. But so some of these things, until you kind of decide some of the manpower placement, the facility stuff don't necessarily, you can't prioritize them. I was asked to do a new building option. If we didn't want to occupy the existing building and we wanted to put in a new fire station and a district headquarters, this is the biggest number you'll gag on, is about $14 million. Now, again, that's a building that's going to probably last 15 years or more. Remember, the Berwyn Firehouse is about 100 years old, so these buildings do last a long time. It's an investment. But I was asked to do that again, just in case somebody said, we may have other reasons for that property. We may want to do something else with the Boy Scout building. Again, my job is to provide you with information to either accept, reject, modify, whatever you need to do with it. But I was asked to do that. That's the number for that. So where are we here? Again, Berwyn is overdue for replacement, not quite 100 years old, built in 29. Bids have been done. This has been talked a great deal about with the townships. There's active negotiation right now for a joint interlocal agreement to figure out how to fund this thing and who's going to be responsible for what. I think they're having even a meeting tomorrow about that. And again, this is just an idea of what was being modified on the second floor of the building by the architect. Second floor plan renovation is $264,000. On Paoli's case, gym and physical fitness room, apparatus floor replacement, front apron, a lot of firefighter health and safety things, again, to try and ward off that cancer potential for firefighters is there. Sleeping rooms, career staff, and addition of a fire suppression detection alarm system. It's very embarrassing when you burn your firehouse down. I'm just saying. We want to have everybody else sprinkler their building, but we don't do it ourselves. So that's in there as well. That's going to take the form of an addition. You see that in white in the back of the building. And again, Bernard Architects did that. The building addition estimate, $3 million. And that's how they laid out, again, eye exam, but that's how they laid out their improvements. And again, you're doing some interior modifications to make the building safer in general, and then you're adding space for the dorm space and other needs. So there's a recommended capital budget for facilities. It ranges from 14 million to 28 million. You can see $2 million at the Valley Forge Road location, if that's option one. If you decide to do something else, 14 million. I think 9 million is about where the agreement is on the funding for the new Bridge Avenue station. I'm including the second floor revisions in that number. And then the addition for Paoli's Firehouse on Darby Road at 3 million. So, 14 million on the low side, 28 on the high side. The most significant choice here is, do you build a new building? And again, nobody says you have to do it right away. There's nothing here that says we have to go out tomorrow and build a $14 million building. We will have to do some things to modify the facility. And again, you can't do everything at one time. So at some point, choices are going to be made as to where we spend the money. And that's that. So that's where we're at the moment. So you have some personnel numbers now. You have a fleet number, and you've got some facility numbers. The recommended district structure, and I've done this, I know that the solicitors were to work on this, perhaps they are, but I'm going to give you some recommendations. That the general structure is that the district be basically established by the two townships through an interlocal agreement. It be governed by a district board. Now again, these are ideas. I put this in my letter. Some of these ideas won't work. I suggested that the board of the district be comprised of township supervisors. What I've come to learn is, due to other government code reasons and conflict of interest reasons, they may not be able to do that. They may have to choose citizen representatives or whoever they want to choose to represent their townships on the board. So again, the idea is that there has to be a board, that they need to represent the townships and the citizens. Who they are is up to you. I just said the supervisors, and I think I learned after that probably is not accurate, is not a good recommendation. The pro rata representation based upon financial contributions. At the moment, that tends to be about a 70%, 30% split, 70% Tredyffrin, 30% Easttown. Again, the idea was that your board would have a similar split, not exactly, because to be exact, you'd have to have 10 people, and that's an even number, but it gives you an idea. And the other idea is that we want to build the structure where if other entities want to join later, they're allowed to. So if Easttown Township decided we think the model that Tredyffrin Easttown are doing makes sense, we think we might want to participate, but we have to have the structure where it allows people to come participate. They may want to do that someday, and you don't want to necessarily preclude that from happening. An executive advisory committee, because there are people that need to have a seat at the table. They're stakeholders that matter. I made a comment here of the township managers or assistants, fire company chiefs or assistants, fire company presidents, members of the public at large. It can be anything you want. But there are people that you don't want to have a board that's so big, it's unwieldy. But there is expertise in the room that need to participate, and we need to figure out what that would look like and what would satisfy everyone, so that we got the information we needed, so that we could make good decisions, and we could tell the board, who could then turn around and tell their townships what we're doing. I think that makes sense. Again, the notion of having an advisory committee, the names and the representatives and the number can change. Need to have a boss. In this case, we suggested the idea of an executive director. To act as the CEO of the district. Could be full-time, part-time, or contracted. Selection could be appointed in collaboration. A lot of people have said, if I'm going to have a boss, am I going to have a say in who that person is? You're just going to pick one and give you the news. And I think everybody else would say, we'd like to maybe have a say in that. The question of how much of a say, I think that's up for you all. Again, total compensation package needs to be competitive, and the employment can either be at will. I work for you, you work for me, doesn't matter until we don't like it anymore, or you could do it with something more formal. A chief of fire and EMS services. Now, here's the thing about the new district is it is a large corporation and it's a big fire department. And those skills are not necessarily, can always be found in the same person. It's often in the business that, there's a reason sometimes why fire companies have business boards and they have firefighters. But I think here's a case where if you could find a candidate that could do both, there might be some economy in that. If not, you may need to do them separately because you are going to run not just run a big system, you're going to build a new system from scratch. And if you've ever been an entrepreneur or built anything from scratch, it's harder to build something from scratch than walking in and running something that's already been running. Okay, so I just mentioned that those two positions might be together, they may not be. Same thing about at-will and compensation. We ought to be able to have deputy directors and deputy chiefs as things grow. Again, part of this to the solicitors would be, none of this says it's going to happen tomorrow, but let's not preclude ourselves from having the opportunity that as the place grows, that is construction, like I say, organizationally, we can accommodate that. Administrative staff and professional contractors and consultants, again, payroll clerks, bookkeepers, human resources, benefits, EMS billing, purchasing agent are things that eventually are being done now by the fire companies. If the townships don't want to take that over, if Mr. DeRocco doesn't think that he'd like to have his personnel department do all this and he thinks the district should, then that needs to happen. But again, I think the heavy lift of starting this is not a simple task. It's doable, but it's not a simple task. And again, so the solicitor, a labor attorney, a specialist that does labor attorney for firefighters and under FLSA law. A medical director, which is different than a fire department physician. A medical director has to have his license. Right now, Paoli and Berwyn have the same medical director, Dr. Ed Dickinson. If the district were to do that, they would need one. And that's not a clean system either. Medical licensing is a big deal. And so as people say, well, gee, should we just spin that off? Even spinning it off to the district will take some coordination and take some finesse. So that's there, you can look at that later. Here's the important part. The way that we envisioned this was the funding was going to come from the townships and from grants and from the EMS reimbursements. And they would go into the district. The district would be the receiver of all the income that the district would run from. Then what would happen is the district would then dispense the funds to the three operating fire companies, plus for its own needs. So Paoli, Berwyn, and Radnor would basically, through a budgeting process and through call volume analysis and that sort of thing, that would happen. So if you think about an hourglass, the district becomes the hourglass of funding. The district would take in the funding of the townships through a coordinated budget process and approval process. It would then dispense that money to the individual fire companies. So obviously, I think about the commercial office supply company, the reset button, but that wasn't my point. Here's a thought. If you remember, I said in whatever it was, the fire company started hiring paid staff. When that started happening, their mission changed. One of the questions here is, can we get the fire companies back to doing what the fire companies were originally intended to do? Which also includes EMS. I'll put EMS in there. But the point is that it was to run a volunteer fire department. It was not to run big labor pools. So the idea here is that, if we took the payroll burden away from the fire companies, and if we took over consolidated EMS billing and that sort of thing, still have the fire companies run the EMS service, but have the district take over that, would it not be easier for the fire companies to be successful? Could they not be focusing more on what they need to do, which is service delivery, minding their own budget? Okay, and would it not be easier for them to do that? And not necessarily every year worry about running a deficit. Can we put them in a position where they can be successful and not have to be either asking for money every year? I think, do we turn the clock back to the way it was a couple, 3 decades ago? Do we do a reset? And I just throw that out there for consideration. The bottom one's kind of important because the question becomes, if you have a fire tax and you're going to go out and try and raise money that way, then the question becomes, well, I just got a hit for a fire tax. Do I really want to have a volunteer fire department contribution come in too? Do I really want the ambulance membership? Aren't I already paying for that? So I just leave that there as one of those things in a workshop to say, if we do this, how would the citizens feel about that? Would they rather say, look, don't hit me up twice, hit me up once. I don't want to worry about this. And oh, by the way, the fire companies can worry more about training people and recruiting volunteers and not having to go raise money. So that's just in there as sort of a question. Financial responsibilities of the district is what that would be. It would be take over EMS billing. It would be to basically operate the system, absorb the current full-time and part-time people, and it would work through its designated EMS provider agencies and its fire agencies. So again, that's there for you to read. I'm not going to read to you. You can perfectly read that. But it is a reset. Now, quality, we review and track response and service matrices. We'd ensure adequate and consistent levels of response. One of the things here is that right now, we're not consistent, and that's true for the whole county. Not every volunteer fire department works the same way. And certainly we think that there's some room for that. And we would be looking at funding I call it the Chesterbrook Station, but Valley Forge Road, because that's not currently in anybody's budget. I mean, Berwyn did some things outside their budget, but they did that, but I don't think anybody's expecting Berwyn to pay $2 million when they're trying to deal with a new station on Bridge Avenue. And then establish consistent financial reporting standards, both between the districts and the fire companies and between the districts and the township. So one of the questions would be, if there's a question from the board, where's the money going? You go to the district executive director, you get the answer from one source, and hopefully that would streamline things. Again, assist in funding major apparatus and their own operation. That just deals with, again, career and part-time personnel. How would that work? Again, a lot of detail there. That's not ready for prime time. That will have to be worked on. A draft organization, just as a draft, that kind of shows the district board at the top with an executive director and a chief of fire and EMS. That could be one or two positions, like I said. An executive advisory committee of the people I spoke about, fire company presidents and fire chiefs and township managers and such. On the contract services, a solicitor, an accountant, an auditor, all the things a government entity has to do would have to be done at the district level. Those things would have to come into that. There's a deputy director for administration, payroll, bookkeeping, human resources, EMS billing, purchasing, grant writing, information technology, website, and social media. They're the things every company would have to do if you were a new company. The fact that you're a government just says you're a government. Same things have to happen. Where do they fit? You do it part-time? Do the volunteers do that on a stipend? Do the townships decide that they'll do it for a while? Don't know. And then at some point, a deputy director, really to run the operations side of things. And that involves, again, the four stations rather, including Radder in this case is on that org chart because of the stipend relationship. And then the career personnel. So, again, I wanted to give you a plan. There was some discussion I'd heard about maybe hiring this boss person by the end of the year. If you wanted to do that, here's an idea. So again, part of this is give you a plan. You can tell me I don't like it. You can tell me we're not doing number 2. We're sure as heck not doing number 2. Just take that out. And you may say, well, it's okay, but we're not going to do it in 6 months. And again, that's all up to you. I want to give you a roadmap as to what to do. So here's the neat thing. I'm officially unemployed today. So July 31st, I guess I work tomorrow too, but basically this is done. And I told everybody, I said, for the supervisors, your real work starts on August 1st. Because everybody's been waiting on this consultant's report. And it's going to be too big to digest. It's a lot of information. So nobody's here to be prepared to, let's go do something. So really, in a way, I've worked for the last 20 weeks to give you, I hope, information that you can use to consider what's going on, make some decisions, ask some questions, be a little more informed. After that, it's kind of up to you. So one of the things we suggested here was the idea of appointing a project manager for study implementation. One of the problems, we talked with the supervisors early on, that there are two things that kill a project. One is perfection, because if you're perfect, you'll never be done. The other is delay, okay? And it's loss of project momentum. We've had some decent momentum for the last 20 weeks. And I would hate to say, great, we got the report, and nothing happens. And so right now, I don't know if anybody has enough time in their universe to go do some of this, but I think you can hire a project manager to help implement this at the direction of the stakeholders, and that may be worthwhile. The entity has to be established. I said September 1, maybe it's November 1, maybe it's never, I don't know, but one of the things we talked about was establishing this entity. That's going to require legal support, legal review, support by the townships. That's going to have to happen. At some point, the board's going to have to be sworn in, because until the board's sworn in, they can't buy a paperclip. There's no authority for anything to happen until it starts with the board. Who will be the representatives of the citizens to be on this new board? I'd like you to select one of the 5 career staffing models. Pick one. pick none. Take D and B and combine them. I mean, but at some point, I think the most significant operational cost you have is that of career staffing. That'll be the biggest thing you'll have to deal with. Establish offices, right now we believe at One Valley Forge Road, and establish all the business systems. You know, there's not a computer, there's not a phone line, there's not a mailing address. The things that you have to do to conduct business don't exist right now. And then write job descriptions for the executive director or the chief of fire and EMS. Now, the reason you have to do that first is when you decide to do that, if you decide to hire a new boss, you have two ways to do it. My estimation, there's always more than two. But you can pick people, you can identify candidates that are currently well known to the board. There are lots of fire professionals in the area. There are a lot of people in Philadelphia that do that. You don't have to do that. The other way to do it is you do a national search or a regional search. You say, you know what, we're just going to throw it open to everybody. Now, if you know people and you know people that are close to you and you've worked with them, that may be a minimal cost, and maybe in 30 days' time you could pick somebody to do something on, okay? If you want to do a national search, that's $25,000 to $75,000, and that's about 5 months. So right now, if anybody thought they wanted to hire a chief January 1 of next year, you'd better get the job description done and get that out to press and look. If you're going to hire a nationally certified headhunting group that finds local, public safety people, then now's the time. If you want to make it in December, it's just a data point. What happens then is that the project manager helps things move along. Maybe works on building plans for Valley Forge Road, tries to get a website, tries to get an email address, tries to do the things you have to do to run business, until such time as the new person is sworn in. And along the way, they can work with the fire companies. We can work on things like, well, what does the budget look like if we take the personnel away and we just let the fire companies do fire apparatus? What does that actually look like? That can be going on between now and December. I mean, the sooner the better, probably, to get an idea of what's this really going to look like. What are we really, what are the boards really being asked to do? And then the idea, and that just kind of ends basically January 24. So I just figured to give you a little bit of an idea for 6 months. This is kind of what you might want to do. Again, there's no magic in 6 months. I just took 6 months because some of the things I heard was, I know in some cases, I know that I want to say that Easttown had a township manager's memo that talked about January 1st. I mean, that's been kicked around, so I didn't make that number up, that date up. But that's an idea, that's something you might want to do. So this is it. This is the slide. This is the one. Mr. Curley, you asked for one slide. Here's your one slide. What's the procedural structural goal? Create a Tredyffrin Easttown Fire and EMS District. Create the entity. Hire an executive director. Eventually to do that, and then retain a project manager so you don't lose momentum. I encourage you to not lose momentum. Financial stuff, big numbers, maximum numbers for your millage if you want to look at that. 14 to 28 million for facilities, $2.4 million for the new fire engine, and I'm recommending $6 million for staff as additional money. That's what I would suggest you do. And again, only for the purposes, here's the deal. None of you told me along the way that you're flush with money and everybody's just dying to spend more money. I know you have to, and it makes sense to do that. But again, the purpose of my doing this was to give you some guidance of what you ought to consider if you're looking at that kind of big picture funding and what might this look like. So having said that, a little bit longer than I intended, but that's where we are. That's what phase one did. Again, the thing I want to mention is, with the good news is you have two fairly wealthy townships. There are a lot of jurisdictions in Pennsylvania that don't have the resources here. A lot of this just has to deal with, do we want to do it? Can we do it? How does this go along? I know that Chairman Gussie said there were two major things pressing the Tredyffrin Township, which was fire and EMS and stormwater. They were identified as a major concern. You're on your way to doing that. I think there's every reason why we should not be 3 years from now having a Sunday airline event saying, didn't anybody see this coming? Okay. The other thing is that unlike the airlines, I was inconvenienced for a day because, and I had to stay in a pretty nasty hotel. But you know what? It didn't kill me. In the fire and EMS business, it can. We're one of the few businesses where we say we're in the life and death business. A lot of people use that as, if I don't make it to this meeting, somebody's going to die. You know what? We use that as phraseology in our normal English all the time. In the case we're talking about, it matters. And the fact is that if you need, as I've said before, if your house is on fire, if your business is on fire, if your child's at the bottom of the swimming pool, if your mother's having a heart attack, you want us to be on a Monday schedule, not a Sunday schedule. You want us on our best day every day. And I think you're in a great position to do that. I appreciate the opportunity to come to work with you and to do this study. I've done the best I can. You know more than you knew before. I'm not sure all the answers are here. I'm not sure everybody likes the answers, but you're further along than you were 7 months ago. And for that, I'm grateful, and I will thank you, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you so much. We don't have any votes or anything on the agenda. I just wanted to make that clear. So we'll just kind of open for discussion. First from board members, if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to chime in.
I have a couple, please. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. I sure hope you get back better or quicker than you did coming. So,
United claims they will.
I'm sorry?
They just my check-in. They claim I can do it. We'll see. But thank you.
So, as you know, we on the task force have been involved in this since 2016, and my questions of tonight's presentation will indicate that we have not seen this prior to tonight to really direct you or give you any other direction.
Sure.
So I have two questions first to put on, and I'll see what other questions come up. But I'll ask them both first, and then you can choose how to answer them. I am curious why you picked our closest comparator to be a fire company that does not have ALS. That's my first, and it would help me to know what those townships pay for their fire companies and also for the ALS service that's not provided. And my other question, which I am familiar with the staffing at our wonderful fire companies, but I really can't correlate where we are today with our staffing with your 5 models.
Okay.
And I also want everyone to know, when you fill in where we are, that 1017 are not necessarily standards we all are watching and are paying great attention to, as well as the fire company for response and number of personnel and apparatus on the site. Mm-hmm. So I just want everyone to know that we have been safe. They have done a fabulous job with all the fires and EMS. So if you could answer those two things, I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, well, let me start backwards, because I think I was asked in my March 8th meeting, what's the level of service now? And I think my response was, I thought it was excellent. I think for just in general, I think the EMS response is very good. Dr. Dickinson agrees with me on that. He thinks the level of care on EMS is excellent. Fire response-wise, as you said, we have managed to get through and done a fairly good job with that. I think this is more of a case of the system is very strained, and you don't want to wait for failure to happen. So number one, and again, I think I also mentioned in the last meeting, was that it's a delicate tightrope, because you don't want to incite people to being worried when there's no need to be, because a fire truck's going to show up and an EMS unit will show up tomorrow, and it's going to be okay. But on the other hand, if you don't indicate there's a problem, then the question is, well, then why are we all here talking about this? So you have the typical thing of saying that the system is strained and we need to start working on that. It's fine at the moment, but you never know when it's not going to be okay. And so I think from the standpoint that you chose to be proactive, hire a consultant, start talking about this, I think that's worthwhile. Regarding East Whiteland, there's not a significant cost difference in providing ALS versus BLS from a personnel standpoint. Now, one of the things I recommended in my model was that we paid paramedic certification pay at $17,000 a year, regardless of rank, because that really simplifies the titles of the payroll structure. So you could be a captain as a paramedic, a battalion chief as a paramedic, a firefighter 2 or firefighter 1 and be a paramedic. Everybody's an EMT, but if you wind up being a paramedic, we define that as a certification cost. In some cases, East Whiteland doesn't need any more staff to do ALS work. They just have to choose to do it. And they have to add the equipment to their existing ambulances. They need to go get medical direction and get approval from the state to do that. So I didn't feel that the fact that they were doing that really mattered from a fire department standpoint. And I think I addressed the issue of how would you compensate people for the additional skill set through the certification pay.
No, Bob, I really wanted to know who provides their ALS then, and how much do they pay as a township?
The answer is I don't know what the township budget is. However, East Whiteland Fire Company is a combined fire. They run EMS. I mean, much like Paoli did before Paoli went advanced life support. So they are a fire-based EMS system. They just have currently not elevated their level of service to ALS capability.
And then on the one of how much staff we have today compared to your 5 models?
And unfortunately, I left that slide out. So full-time right now, there are 10 full-time people at Berwyn, and Chief Testa, it's 8. Okay, 8 at Paoli, so there are 18 full-time people now. And I realized on the airplane I left that slide out.
Well, you had a lot of time before the airplane ride also.
You know, Supervisor, I have no comeback for that comment. What else may I answer?
Yeah,
I had an additional question. Could you, if I'm understanding the presentation correctly, the costs that were projected for the battalion model do not include the cost for, say, the executive director, any of the administrative staff, or any of the deputy chiefs?
Actually, I kind of threw in some numbers in that $6 million number. But it's too soon to tell. And the reason for that is you could have a district where the director is really a CPA. All you really want them to do is watch the money. You know, right now the townships are giving money to the fire companies. We just want to make sure we know where it's going, and we want a budget process. You could have that, just a director that just pretty much is an economic auditor that does that, in which case there's not much to the budget at all. If you start saying that, there could be a question of, I don't know what's going to happen. The fire companies may decide to say, we don't think we'd like to give up our people. We think we'd like to keep them. Well, if the personnel stays at the fire company level, you don't need personnel work at the district level. So this is why I said, one of the things that would be kind of fun to do is if you got together and said, look, pick a number. If we gave you $3 million, how would you spend it? And let the fire companies and perhaps me as a consultant say, look, we'll come back and say, if you give us a spending level, we'll tell you what we think is the very best split. It goes to equipment, goes to people, does whatever, it goes to admin. But to be direct with you, we did not go that far because at some point it was so vague. It wasn't. I didn't want to recommend one until we knew a little bit more about what you wanted to do and what direction you wanted to take and how fast you wanted to take action.
So then a follow-up question I think would be, you mentioned the billing for, I guess, the EMS services. I know that's become a sticking point for our township. We're, often running a deficit on the collections there. I saw that in the presentation, that was one of the items that I guess the district would take over, and I'm wondering, or potentially the townships, how would you anticipate that would improve at all with just a simple shift? I know that the fire companies already outsourced that.
Okay, so let me try and answer it this way. When I talk to the fire companies, and again, they're all here, so if I got it wrong, they're going to raise their hand and say, Dr. Andrews misheard me when I said that. I don't know that anybody relishes the idea of doing EMS billing. I don't know that anybody wants to fight to do that. I can tell you at Radnor Fire Company, when I was here visiting, Paoli and Berwyn Fire Companies use the same third-party collection agency. Radnor does not. When I was at Radnor, they actually had a vendor problem. Their vendor had gone out of business, and we had talked about, gee, couldn't we all go together on that? Do we have to have, three different people doing that? The key tends to be where does the cost go? So as an example, if you say that relief funds can't be used to buy ambulances, and the township has to do that. Would it not make more sense to keep the income together with the expenditures? Regarding billing, in some cases, the EMS billing does make money. So again, when you talk about, we lose money, make money, that's a fairly tenuous question that you have to ask, well, what does that really mean? Because if you talk about taking it away, it's like, well, wait a minute, that funding helps fund our firefighters. So I think you have to look at, that's why, again, if you take ambulance fund billing, ambulance cost, career staff, and you move them together, you kind of move them together. You could just say, well, just leave it as it is, and then determine, what if there's a gap, where the gap is. The answer to the question is, that would be a good workshop title to figure out, how do we really want to do this and what really is going on? That we just ran out of, to do what we had to do, we did not get to that level of detail.
One final question. I know with the 75% conservatively of the calls in both townships are EMS,
Yep.
ALS and BLS calls.
Correct.
Looking at your slide over the 3 years, fire calls have actually decreased since 2020 in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you talked a little bit about sort of firefighter and EMS paramedic and how that person exists. I'm wondering, in your model, everything was firefighter slash paramedic, firefighter slash EMT, but I thought you had mentioned that EMTs and a lot of the ALS, BLS personnel are not actually firefighters. So I'm wondering if you could explain that.
I understand, maybe I wasn't clear on that. I was saying, theoretically, okay, the training requirements to be a firefighter are so much harder that if you took a private ambulance service, I'll give an example. Upper Marion's dealing with this right now. Okay, Upper Marion took over, help me.
Lafayette Ambulance.
Thank you, Lafayette Ambulance, okay, thank you. And what's happening now is they're having to merge those two systems because you had legacy EMS people that were never firefighters. They're actually having to have two different collective bargaining agreements. So you're going to have two groups of the firehouse working under the same roof with different bargaining agreements. So what happens is it's much easier for a firefighter to pick up the paramedic training or to pick up the EMT training in some cases than to have it go the other way. So what I meant to say was it's a little bit harder for the typical EMS only person to pick up firefighting. That's what I meant to say. In the case here, what happens is that, here's the deal. The deal is that, I'll say it this way, fires in the townships right now are a low frequency, high risk event. They don't happen as often as medical calls do. But when they do happen, they can be very, very labor intensive and the stakes can be very high. And so the problem is, I actually had somebody in the study, I can't remember who it was, that actually made an assertion, well, I'm not sure we need a fire company. I mean, looking at the stats, you would say, well, they don't do it very often and it seems to be trending down a little bit and all the calls seem to be EMS calls. And that somebody actually raised the question, well, I'm not sure we need a fire department. And I kind of went to myself, I don't know that all the citizens would think that was a good idea. So what happens is you will never totally get rid of the fire problem. And when they happen, they tend to be spectacular. And I think the rule of thumb is while you have fires and while people are at risk, and while there's a threat to fire, you have to have a fire department. Unless you just choose, which I would never recommend, that you just somehow not have a fire department. The best way to help fund that fire department is by using EMS staff that are cross-trained, in my professional opinion. So it often comes, it's so far out of proportion. And the city of Philadelphia has the exact same proportion we're talking about. There's nobody in Philadelphia saying we should get rid of all the red trucks because they have enough call volume. Again, I don't know that they have a lot. They probably do because of socioeconomic systems, but they probably do have more calls. But in some cases, everybody's about the same. EMS runs about 70, 80% of the call volume everywhere in the country. That's just how it goes. If your community is more modern or more wealthy, the good news is you tend to have fewer fires because in general, people are more responsible and you don't have some social issues with that. But if you have 3 or 4 major fires, the old answer is, is it your house that's on fire? Is it your kid that's trapped? And at that point, it's not about money anymore. And I'm not trying to be sensationalistic, but the point is that you can never correlate low fire volume compared to the percentage of EMS and to me justify not having a fire department. So as long as you have one, You need to go up and you need to attend to it correctly. It's a very staff-intensive operation, much more so than EMS is. And to do that, having a combined system where you have both being cross-trained, to me, is the best economic model, and that would be my suggestion. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, I think
just-
that, oh, sorry.
I just want to correct, no one ever said we don't need a fire company in our task force meetings.
Well,
The question was, it appears as though we are more of an EMS station with fire. So and then that was just leading us down the path of, should we be looking at this a different way? You have just clarified that you like the
My
cross.
question ultimately, too, was more about firefighter support. So you gave us a comparable where there was not the ALS services. Actually, I think you gave us two comparables where there was not the ALS service.
Right.
So my question really was directed to, well, since our model seems to be specifically ALS, BLS heavy, why would we not consider potentially looking at that as a separate model and concentrating, potentially our monies on the firefighting services? There are several other factors, especially within Easttown Township, that I think, are unique to Easttown Township. But I think the other question is, I've done a lot of research online, and I think there are also, questions about the efficacy of ALS over BLS services, and especially with cardiac arrest, whether or not ALS is as effective as just BLS. So I was just sort of wondering.
So I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask you to kind of restate. That was a very long question.
It wasn't a question. I was just saying I was actually concentrating on why we wouldn't concentrate on supporting our firefighting staff and not so much the EMS staff.
Because the comparator for pay and benefits was more applicable than fire versus EMS. Okay, and in some cases, Norristown is an example that does not run EMS, have fairly similar wage scales to some of the others. So the reason I did that was because of the overall pay and benefits. This was not an EMS versus fire review. I tried to find those departments that were most closely reasonable, because again, what was the thing I was asking? You asked me to do. What do these unit costs amount to for people? The other is an interesting comment, but it does not directly relate to the pay and benefit structure. Okay, example, you could ask as easily, East Whiteland is represented by a union, and Berwyn and Paoli are not. Why didn't you study more people that didn't have unions? So there are a lot of things you could do to say, well, was this comparison right? In my judgment, they were the best comparators. And again, East Whiteland was running a 3-platoon system, which is something I think we should go to versus a 4-platoon system. They are our closest competitor. And they do have a bargaining agreement, which would say that we ought to be knowledgeable of what that bargaining agreement says. So in some cases, I just felt, in my judgment, those for the reasons we were doing this. Now, if you want to say benchmarking on ALS or BLS and that, different question, but I did not study that question. Good question. Good question. And by the way, ma'am, I didn't say you said it or the board said it. I just said somebody said it.
So I guess I have a sort of a comment and a question that's gonna, and my focus is more on the bigger picture of issues. And it kind of goes to the issue I'm struggling with, and the issue I want to talk about is, do we need this type of structure at all, as opposed to moving away from the structure we currently have? And I think you acknowledge that, and I would agree with you that the level of service from all our fire companies is excellent. What's driving this, and one of the things I want to talk about is sort of defining what the problem is that we're trying to solve.
Sure.
And I think you said the problem is that the system is strained, and I assume you're talking basically financial system.
No, the service delivery system. This, again.
Okay, well that's helpful, because as far as so if we're trying to solve the service delivery system, how will setting up a fire district assist in that?
Okay, so a couple things. One of them is a government structure fire department has some more tools in the toolbox as a government entity under the Fair Labor Standards Act than a nonprofit corporation does. Your fire companies are nonprofit corporations. So as an example, a Kelly Day, this thing called a Kelly Day, is specifically available for municipal fire departments, government fire departments. So one, there's some structural things that if you want to look at a new structure, they're not available. To have the economic benefit, they're not available without doing a district structure. The other thing is that right now, if you want to have some commonality, and one of the things that came up was, if you think about the number of people involved from the fire company level in the boards of supervisors and township management, there are just an awful lot of people involved. There's nothing that says you can't continue funding things exactly the way they are now. But I think from the standpoint of trying to get some consolidation of accountability and management, it was suggested that the district made some sense. The other thing is, if we think that regionalization is coming, if we think that this is a good idea, and we need to have more, in Pennsylvania, we need to have more regionalization than less. In some cases, what has happened is fire companies have gone together and regionalized, and they've gone together. There has not been a government consolidation yet. I think that's a better model. Because you have the direct reporting of citizens and that sort of thing, and then you're open to having another government join. The question becomes, who's responsible for fire and EMS? And people could say, well, the fire companies are. Well, no, they're not. The government's responsible for fire and EMS. Who you choose to operate that system is up to you. You could have Kansas City operate out of Valley Forge Road. But the point is that the townships have relied upon the fire companies for so long. They almost think it's a fire company problem, but it isn't. I've heard from the very beginning, people would say, well, why are we subsidizing the fire companies? Well, the answer is they've been subsidizing the townships for 100 years with volunteers and other things. So I think the district model does change things to where it gives you more accountability. You can really do away with some of the barriers and the turf and the other kinds of things that occur. That can go away, and it opens you up to having other municipalities join, which should give you at some point, especially at headquarters, cost savings through scale.
So it seems like we toggled back to finances again. And so can you help me understand the difference between service delivery and the difference between service delivery and level of service?
Oh, sorry, service delivery.
You said, well, where the stress is.
Yep.
What's the difference between, if the level of service is excellent, why is the system stressed in a non-financial way?
Well, the system is stressed because of how close you. So here's the deal. There's a metric. I don't have the number. The term is scratching. Okay, in the fire. I'm sorry. Am I here? Okay, I'm sorry. So by Chester County Fire Dispatch. Okay. And what happens is when a fire station gets called, they put out the call over the radio. And depending upon what's going on, there's no response. Okay, because either they're on the ambulance and they can't be on the fire truck at the same time, or two ambulances are out at the same time. And so what happens is, how long does that happen before they dispatch the next closest fire company? And how does that relate to response time? Our biggest metric is people and response time. We need to get there and we need to be there with enough people to do the job. There's a financial consequence to it. Okay, yeah, they're having trouble paying bills. And here's the other thing I guess I wanted to say. I was told once upon a time, if you have a problem that money can fix, you don't have a problem. We're not looking for a cure for cancer, dementia, Alzheimer's. The EMS and fire technology in this country is outstanding. Okay, the people here do the best they can to provide service until they don't have enough people and they don't have enough equipment because they just don't. Money is a contributor to that. Money's not the cause. The issue is everything we do on service delivery is based upon two things: getting there the fastest we can, consistently, with enough people to do the job once they arrive.
So I'm going to ask one last question then on, because I know there's a lot of other people that have questions, including the public. The question then, if service delivery is the issue, how does creating a district that is ultimately, if I remember the graphic that you had, will take the money and distribute it out, maybe own some of the assets. How does that solve the service delivery problem?
Well, I guess the main thing is, on a strategic level, you're sure that the money's going where it needs to go. So, as an example, okay, and Dr. Gussie kind of knows this because she has a neat metric, because you could look at the system a couple of ways. Do I look at property tax values and split it up that way? Do I look at population, split it up that way? Or do I look at acreage, land mass? Turns out they're all about 70-30, okay? So I think the better way to do it is that you make sure that the people providing the service get funded based upon their level of service delivery. Okay, so as an example, if, like right now you could say, well, we have two fire companies. We have Paoli Fire Company in Berwyn. I mean, Bradner's just on a stipend. Let's just take those two. 50-50. Two fire companies, this much money, have at it. But that may not be where the call volumes is. If Berwyn's running twice as many calls as Paoli is, well, wouldn't it be better to split up the money based upon call volume? Because the idea is we need to tie the income to the expenditure, and the expenditure needs to be used based upon service delivery. So that's part of what's going on there. And I think that's the better way to do it. The other thing, remember, on the March 8th meeting, okay, you passed 4 resolutions. One was to accept my report. One was to engage the solicitors to start working on the creation of the district and work on the language for that. One was to approve the resolution for the Bridge Avenue Fire Station. And one was to get in the budget hiring a new boss. So some of this I didn't make up.
I'm not pointing the finger at you. I'm trying to understand if we're talking about, and I'm going to round the number because we've said it, based on the 6 million plus the 14 to 20. If we're talking about $20 million to create this structure, what's the value?
Well, number one, I think it's a 10. I wouldn't say 20. 10 may be 10 too much, but I'm just saying that I will help you a little bit with that. Okay, I will tell you that there's been a couple of numbers floated around. Okay, well actually, it's in Mr. Curley's memo to the Easttown Township. He said if we're looking at a $10 million budget all in, that's about $7 million a year for Tredyffrin, $3 million for Easttown. So some of these, and by the way, I would say that's a reasonable number based upon my report. Okay, so you're not that far away, and I understand their questions, but it's not 20. It's not 20. I don't think it's $10. I think that 10-3 split or that 7-3 split is probably valid. But again, but it's interesting because again, I didn't mean to sound defensive. But in some cases, the question, well, why are we looking at district? Well, I don't know. You told me to go study that. So I mean, I think I know why.
Well, right. We wanted you to. And by the way, I think you've done an excellent job.
Thank you.
I'm very happy with your service. I mean, my ultimate question is going to be, one of the reasons, and I can't speak for the whole board or 2 boards, one of the reasons I wanted you to study it was to see, is this something worthwhile doing? And so I'm still struggling with that. And what is the problem it's going to solve, and whether there's, and maybe there's not, and maybe this is the best way to do it. But I want to make sure if we're going down this road, we're not skipping over that initial step of, is this worthwhile doing? Because I think you've done a very nice job of laying out what the different options are and how it would work. And you did address the underlying why. But for me, that's where I want to dig in a little bit more.
Okay, well, at some time, and I know we have a workshop tomorrow. I'm not sure who else is going to be in the workshop, but because at some point this is a lot to. I mean, this is you just got fed through a fire hose, right? This is a lot of information. I would be happy because one of the questions I'd like to ask is, well, what would satisfy you? If you said, look, I'm just not sure that this is the right thing to do. One of the questions would be, is there an answer? And what form would that answer take, and what would it take? Because you're an elected official, you have budget responsibility, it's a reasonable question. I would just ask as a researcher, what would that kind of look like? In what form would that answer have to take for you to feel like I answered your question? Because I'm not sure I'd answer it really right.
Yeah, no, you have, and you've answered it, and I'll answer your question, and then, even though I said I was going to shut up, but they know me well enough to know when I say that I don't really mean it. What would make, I agree with you 100%. Public safety is our job. These guys out there help us.
Sure.
So we need to provide public safety, we need to provide firefighting, we need to provide EMS. And I want to do that. What I want to do it in the most cost-effective way. The most effective, cost-effective, highly effective, not necessarily just efficient, but effective, cost-benefit, good value. We have to do it. I just want to make sure we're doing it in the best way and in the most cost-effective way. That's ultimately what I'm going for.
Sounds perfectly fair.
But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your report. It was really good and really detailed. I just want to give a little background. Before you started the report, I'd gone around to all the neighboring fire companies and spent some time talking to them. I spent a day at Berwyn, 2 days at Paoli. What I've learned is firefighting and ambulance is a tough job these days, and it's not a well-paying job. Most of the people I met work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. I later went to the 911 center and watched what Dr. Andrews saw. I saw them having 3 calls at once and having to move fire and ambulance services around the county to make sure that there was coverage everywhere, and there were holes in coverage that they couldn't meet because there just weren't enough active, I think it was EMS, wasn't enough active. So I completely understand the stress that the fire and EMS people in our county are under, in particular Paoli and Berwyn. I also understand that we've already spent a lot more money on fire and EMS than we did before. I think it's been going up dramatically. It's going to go up more, and if we're going to be giving more and more money to the Paoli and Berwyn fire companies, we need to have more governance over that. We can't just give them, write them a blank check and see what happens. We need to have the governance structure of this, something to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I appreciate all the hard work you've done, by the way.
Well, thank you very much.
So can we just talk about your option B, which is 18 people per shift, 54 total?
Mhm.
So we heard a while ago now at this point that between the 2 fire companies, they have 18 FTEs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that mean we're understaffed by like 36 FTEs?
Well, first off, the 18 full-time people are full-time. The part-time people give you the FTE number. So if you look at the part-time people, you look at them, if they were all together, how many full-time people, the full-time equivalent is what they would do. The answer is that one's a little bit harder to determine.
So where do you think we are relative to your 54 FTEs? You don't have to answer right now.
No,
but
I'm with you. I think you're probably 30% there, maybe.
We're 30% there.
Yeah, and the other thing too is when I threw in this little issue called constant manning, see what the constant manning piece means is there's always 4 people on the fire truck. So if somebody's sick, somebody's on vacation, it's deer hunting season, whatever reason they're not there, we still staff that. Nobody's doing that now. And so that's a number that I don't have in here because to some degree to get a better number of that, you have to know head by head what the current level of time off is. So I think at this point, if you say we have, and remember too, that if you took the 18 people that are currently working 4 shifts, and we let them work 3 shifts, you already have a bump in staff, in manpower, based upon the shift staffing. But that means we have to have an attractive pay and benefits package. And one of the things I asked, I will get to your question, one of the things I asked in my little firehouse poll as I would go around and have a cup of coffee and talk to people, as I said, how many of you are working more than one job? And the answer is a lot of people are. They work at Berwyn on Monday and they work at Malvern on Tuesday. They do that. And one of the things I asked was, is that something you would do anyway? Or is that something you have to do because you don't make enough money in your primary job? And I asked the question, would you do that? One of the biggest contributors to supervisor, that the question of where do we think we are, is that's kind of in play. We have 18 full-time people working a four platoon system. Okay, which means by design, the 4-platoon system is 33% more labor intensive than a 3-platoon system. So if you say, how are we? I'm comparing a 4-platoon system that exists to a 3-platoon model that's in your model.
So we're still, I guess the answer I'm hearing is we're still significantly understaffed relative to what you're talking about.
You are.
All right, let me go, I'm going to look at page 35, which is your cost page.
Okay.
How does this page compare to what we would see at East Whiteland? And
I don't
almost
know.
more importantly, how does it compare to what we're paying
Let me try and get
today?
there. Let me try and get there. Hold on, I got to go back. Oh. That one there?
Yeah. So how does that compare to what you saw in East Whiteland? And then how does that compare
I think the salary levels on a 3-platoon system are quite competitive. And not overly competitive. I just tried to match. I wasn't trying to beat it by 10%.
Yeah. So this is sort of
and that's why I like them. I think that I think that's pretty close to what they're doing. Now again,
how does it compare to what we're paying at our fire companies at Paoli and at Berlin?
Again, hard to say. Okay. Because they're not very consistent with that. The answer is I don't know. I'm tap dancing.
That's fine. If you don't know, just say that. That's totally fine. These guys know.
But here's, actually they can answer. The thing I know though is the way to figure that out is to actually get to workshop and look at real numbers with real people and look at a real pay and benefits package and do the comparison. I think the answer to really get to your answer is to actually work the problem.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, there's an answer. These guys probably can figure it out.
Unless somebody from Berwyn wants to chime in.
Can I just go to, then I get to my last question, which is really, I think one of the things we're all struggling with, I'm struggling with, I think you're probably struggling with too, is on page 75, just the extent of organization you think we need for the district.
Well, they're asterisks.
Really surprising.
They're asterisks there, which says as needed. So look for the asterisks. But again, well, the only thing that doesn't have an asterisk right now is the director, because you have to have a boss. The rest of it is, again, well.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. I thought it was on. I'm trying to, sorry about that. So how much of that do we really, so you think all we really need is one person?
I don't think you need one person, but,
okay.
But the question is, if you make the job limited enough, you don't need one. I mean, the idea is, do you staff up for the job or do you change the job to meet the staff? And part of this is a question of, are we trying, which one wins? And part of it is, if you tell me what you think the staffing is going to be, and if you think that these are the responsibilities that need to move, the biggest question is, what duties do the fire companies retain? And what duties does the district take over? And once you begin to know that, I can give you a better map. But functionally, you're standing up a brand new government. It doesn't have anything. Mm-hmm. Do you want them to have an email address? Do you want them to have a web page? Do you want them to do purchasing? There's not a single bank account to write a payroll check out of. Somebody has to do that, and they kind of fit the functions of those boxes. I think it isn't the size of the organization that should be daunting. It's the work that needs to be done to stand up the organization. That should be the daunting part. Now again, I can tell you that I studied the Central Bucks Regional Police Department. They have 7 entities that run the police department. In their particular case, Doylestown Township, the county seat of Bucks County, they do all the administration for the cop shop. There's not a single administrative person that works in the police department. They're police officers and detectives and custody people and that sort of thing. That was not, when I approached that was not on the table. So, the biggest, again, a big question. Do you want the townships to take this on and do it themselves? Well, the district gets much smaller. If they think that, no, we really think that needs to be standalone, then, again, in some cases, there's just some policy, not even a policy decision, a policy direction. We think, again, comments like, how much of the fire company responsibilities do we think would be better served by moving that to a district? If the answer is, we'll just hire 20 people and we'll give 10 to Berwyn and give 10 to, we'll give 10 to Berwyn and 10 to Paola, you can do that. There's nothing says you can't do that. But I can tell you they don't pay each other the same. They don't have the same benefits. There's nothing common amongst the two fire companies that are operating right here. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question then based on that?
Sure.
Because that was my original question too. In your experience then, would your recommendation be that the entity would operate more efficiently with this additional staff taking care of those specific job duties, rather than, like you said, two fire companies, two townships with entirely separate needs and, systems trying to facilitate duplicative tasks?
I'll answer it this way. I believe done well, the advantages of that far outweigh the disadvantages. Get done well.
I had a quick question, and this is probably getting in the weeds. I know that for me personally, there's sort of an iterative process between looking at requirements to moving to cost to looking at requirements, and you kind of have to go around in circles a few times before deciding. And I know we've talked a lot about governance, but getting into the weeds, you recommended a quint one. Is that because we're starting to see more high-rise buildings in the area, and also what would you define as a high-rise building versus a non-high-rise building?
Sure. So, again, I have all of my fire service peers that will be happy to disagree with me on this. I like look at that fire truck as an engine company with a rescue ladder on it. I don't look at it as a big ladder truck. Some people would say that's what we need. Now, what happened was, for reasons that made sense to Berwyn Fire Company, they sold their ladder truck a year or two ago because they thought it had too much maintenance, and because of resale values, it was a good time to sell it. That capability has not been replaced. You had two ladder trucks in the two companies, and they're down to one. Now they've taken that money and they put it towards the new fire truck, which also helped because they're now, at the moment, they're staffing two firehouses. So their operation has changed because what used to work out of one firehouse now has to fit for two. So they made a decision for, I think, well-reasoned reasons to go do that. At the moment, you don't have the ladder capability for rescue in particular because that truck went away. I thought this might be a creative way and to save some money of doing that in one vehicle. But again, there are a lot of tacticians here and people that are on apparatus committees, and they love that kind of thing, and that would be it. That would be a debate that, trust me, you would not want to be part of, to watch that process work. But that's why it's there. Yeah.
All right, any more board comment? Before we move to public comment, I think we're going to take a 5-minute break, so the court reporter can take a break especially. So why don't we meet back in 5 minutes? All right, so I think we will get started again, and we will move to public questions and comments. Oh, we will wait for Dr. Andrews so that we can actually get answers to those questions.
So, in terms of process, chairs, like we did last time, we'll do virtual. We have a virtual person that had her hand up for a very long time, so I think we should start virtual this time, and then we'll go back and forth as needed, if that makes sense.
Yep, I think that makes sense. And when you do speak, be sure to state your name and I guess just what township you're in, or do you still need address, I guess? Address. And try to keep your comments as brief as you can. We got a lot of people tonight. And yeah.
Do we know where our consultant is? He back?
Yeah,
yet?
we're just waiting.
Waiting for a plan.
No.
Okay, good.
All right, so we will start with our virtual hand. Stacy Ballard.
Hi, this is Stacy Ballard. I'm an Easttown Township resident and business owner. And if you need my address, it's 72 Main Avenue in Berwyn. My question or my comments are, I guess I was expecting more detail from this presentation, but I also didn't know exactly what the scope of the work was. So I guess my first question is, it seems like this district model has a tremendous amount of unexpected, at least from my perspective, overhead and oversight. And it would seem that, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe you have a district person that oversees things, but then couldn't a lot of those functions be operated within the township staff or under their purview?
That's directed to me? Okay. The answer is yes. Townships could do that if they were willing to do that. I think that's a policy decision between the Board of Supervisors and the township management. I think we talked about that. Your other question, ma'am? The question of where can the work be done?
Just was to reiterate two comments that I had at the township meeting regarding the earned income tax, is that it seems like there are two issues at hand, and some are short-term problems, and then there's some very large number long-term capital expenditures. And I just hope that our two boards look at those and with the realization that a lot of this stuff does not need to happen tomorrow, and that there needs to be some strategic planning. I do like the idea, if there is this district entity, that there are township officials as well as members of the public at large, although I think more than two public members would be necessary, because I think there's a lot of extremely smart and clever business people that are in our community that we should certainly take advantage of their input in that. And that is all I have on my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments? Feel free to come up.
Good evening, Tom Torson. I'm a Tredyffrin resident at 100 Daleview Road.
Your name?
Tom? Torson, Torresson. 100 Daleview Road, Berwyn, president of Berwyn Fire Company. Dr. Andrews, are you able to pull up the staffing model maps specifically for option D?
Sure. Forgive me while I scroll. But
Yeah, there were a couple of questions from supervisors about our current staffing situation, so I thought it would be helpful to identify.
Sorry. Option, right there.
D as in dog.
Oh, D as in dog, sorry. There you go.
Right, so essentially where Berwyn Fire Company is today is that we are staffed 4 people 24/7. So essentially we're staffing 2 MICUs. Paoli Fire Company, correct me if I'm wrong, is staffed 4 people during the day, which would be an engine company with no MICU, and then 2 people overnight, which would be a MICU with no engine company. This option D is essentially what the fire companies have been asking for since I've been president for 6 years. So this is not optimal in terms of meeting the NFPA 1710 response standard, but it's certainly a dramatic improvement over where we stand today. I also wanted to address a couple of comments about the level of service that is being provided to the residents. The word excellent, the level of it's excellent in terms of we're doing the best we can with what we have. We provide on a monthly basis our response, how often we hit a response standard for EMS calls, as well as how often we hit the response standard for fire calls. The fire calls are based on 1720 standard, NFPA 1720, which is a primarily volunteer model. It allows for a 10-minute response time for a structure fire. If you notice on the reports that we're providing for 3 years, we do hit the response time over 90% of the time on average. Where we fall short is we do not have enough people. So it is not excellent or any level of service that I want as a taxpayer to have, Evan Brazunas and Eric show up to my house when it's on fire with 2 people on the truck. If you're only looking at us getting on scene with 1 fire truck with 1 or 2 people in it, that is not excellent in any sense of the word. And that's what's happening. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, does it matter? No. But we could regale you with story after story after story of where it does matter, and it has mattered. And does it put residents at risk? Not as much as it puts us at risk, because we're the ones going in with only 1 person entering in a burning building. Happens all the time. It's dangerous, and it's got to stop. The building needs to be replaced. We need people. And if it takes a fire district to do that, we're all for it. If it takes more money, we're all for it. But for one, this is, I've got 4 months left in my term. I will not be running again because I am sick to death of coming here year after year after year after year and having arguments with Mark Freed where he's telling me I'm an idiot for calling this an urban area, and having arguments with Betsy Fadden about what's appropriate service, what's not, and more importantly, just coming and saying, we need money, we need money, we need money. Guess what? This guy, you guys just paid a crap ton of money to, and he echoed everything that we've been telling you year after year after year. For God's sakes, listen and do something. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? And if there is anyone online, we will switch to that, but I don't see a hand, so come on up. Yep.
Thank you. My name is Chris Polites. I live at 2002 Polites, spelled Polite with an S. Polites. 2002 White Horse Road, Berwyn, PA, 19312. Give me my social security. No, I'm kidding. My question is actually, from what I understand, you said we had a need for a 3rd fire station on Valley Forge there, up at 252. Are they building so we have the Berwyn, we have 3 fire stations. You're thinking
You already have one on Valley Forge Road. You have a 3rd fire
okay, so
station.
we have 3.
Yes.
Okay, this might be a little naive, but on your study, you didn't mention anything about any fire stations sort of to the south of us. Immediately to the south is Newtown Township. I think the population there is maybe 24,000 residents plus. They have 1 fire station, and they service, and I think it's a 5 or 6 bay station. South of that, you have Marple Station, which happens to be 100% volunteer. They also have 1 station, brand new station. And south of that, we have Springfield Township. Again, 24,000 residents plus. They have 1 station. So I don't understand, and believe me, I appreciate everything the firefighters do. The service is excellent, I believe, in spite of the fact you don't get everything you want. But my question is, why do we need 3 stations? It just doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
So I can say when we started this analysis to have a substation. We looked at the response, the times. I think it was just by making a map with how fast a car could go from the station to each place. And you could see that there was a clear need in that area of Tredyffrin Township, where the other two stations wouldn't be able to get there within a safe time, particularly for ALS situations.
Well, and we even proved it out because when the bridge near Valley Forge Middle School was under construction, the Berwyn Fire Company put a substation on this side of the hill on the Pico property. And we saw the response times in this area right here where we live, or where you're located right now anyway, where I live, reduced pretty significantly, and the level of service to the residents was significantly increased. So it was, not only was it theoretical, but we actually proved it out with a test. Thanks.
And Supervisor Miller, I'll add to that a couple things. One is we looked early on at the notion of a two-station model, which would have involved shutting down Paoli, okay, which would probably not make Paoli very happy. But I will tell you one thing, I've not been an elected official, but I've advised a lot. It's one thing to go get funding to build a fire station. You have to have political will to shut down a fire station, in particular the people that live around Darby Avenue. So I think, number one, we were not tasked with the idea of if we were to have a single station, where would it be? And based upon the mountain and based upon the fact that you can move east and west easier than north and south in the township, the people I talked to said that would not be a good idea. But we did look at it, but we did not pursue that for both the reality reasons of, do we really want to get into the issue of closing firehouses? And it was not part of the study. That could be another study. But I agree that response time wise, that one of the biggest issues of things that will change this is staffing. We did not look at a centrally located firehouse staffed with enough people to see whether or not we could get to, I'm going to say 1710, not 1720 response standards, if that would work or not. Quite frankly, the township just bought a piece of property on Valley Forge Road. Berwyn Fire Company just put resources in it. I thought that was already a policy decision. The issue of Bridge Avenue, there doesn't seem to be an issue of do we need one. The question is just what's the contractual relationship. And nowhere have I suggested that, I could make a statement that between Station 4 at Malvern and Station 3 at Paoli, maybe you don't need both of those, but I think a station to serve the west part of Tredyffrin Township is still necessary from a response time standpoint.
All right, we will move to the virtual question. Michael Novak.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. Michael Novak, Easttown Township resident, 2058 Fox Creek Road. So I just had a question. You talked a little bit about governance and oversight, but I'm trying to understand how would you shift more to this district model if the fire companies are they're established as 501c3 or nonprofit organizations. They have their own assets, cash, investments, whatever else they have, fixed assets with all the equipment. How do you kind of merge that into a district? This might be more a question for legal, but I'm just kind of curious, how that would happen.
So if you remember seeing the slide that had the reset button on it, do you remember seeing that? There was a slide that had a turn back the clock and a reset button, which addresses some of what you're asking. The idea is that you let the nonprofit corporations continue to be nonprofit corporations. Let them own the apparatus, let them replace it on their schedule, let them recruit, train, and retain volunteers, have basically their corporate structure work the way it has been and to do what they've done well for over 100 years. The real question was simply the reallocation of manpower to the district, looking at doing some common administrative functions, and looking at maybe consolidating EMS billing and EMS funding. But I'm not advocating at the moment that the fire company structure doesn't work fine if we go back to the things they were used to doing before they expanded. I think both the district and the fire companies can live in harmony in a way that supports both in a symbiotic way.
Mr. Novak, do you mind just saying your address again for the court reporter?
It's 2058 Fox Creek Road.
Thank you. All right, any other public questions or comments?
Hello, Ray Clark, 1564 Overlook Place, Malvern and Tredyffrin. Many thanks to the supervisors for really good questions, I think, that test the assumptions that have been given to us today. It's really as though the presentation was designed to convince us not to invest all this money, seems to me. And I go back to a comment I made at the original meeting back in March or February, where we looked at the call volume data with a baseline of COVID, the COVID year, without going back any further. So we showed this line extrapolating at 20% growth in call volume a year. That same slide is still here, even though we were asked today about 2023 volumes, which we've had 7 months of the year. We should know if that line is being followed, surely. And do we really believe it's going up at 20% a year? So on the demand side, lots of questions. On the supply side, clearly we know that there's been pressure on getting volunteers. We've had to hire more staff. But let's have some data beyond that little chart that shows some artificial curvy, wavy graph going downwards. I mean, what is the data on how many, the growth in career staff versus decline in volunteers that might allow us to say, and there was a really good point from Joe about the actual physical problem that he has, like not enough staff at certain times. He's looking for this number of staff at this time, and that really wasn't addressed. The comparison, which some of you were asking about, how does the proposal compare with today's situation? If you just look at the FTE numbers in a slide that wasn't here, there was so many full-time, so many part-time, and if you add all that up, it's about 33, 34 FTEs. And the option B was 54. So effectively, we're looking at adding 20 FTEs. If you multiply that out with the numbers in the presentation, that's about $2.4 million in salaries. And then yet we're looking at $6 million of added bureaucracy to manage that whole thing. It really just doesn't go around. And really no sense of how this district, who's employing the staff, then interfaces with the fire companies who are using the staff to respond to the emergencies. And like, how does all that supervision work, performance reviews? It seems like a mess to me. And I'm glad you were asking really good questions about it. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Michael Heberg, I'm at 430 Margot Lane in Berwyn. The last name is spelled Heaberg. First of all, I have a question related to how the police force sort of integrates into this, because in my experience in Tredyffrin, or from what I remember, the police force are first on scene probably a majority of the time to provide some of the response, first medical response. I think that that's one of the emotional arguments that you hear in these conversations is, well, if I'm lying on the floor having a heart attack, who's going to be there, right? And in most cases, the police officers are going to be there first. And they provide us with additional coverage. I mean, both townships spend a significant amount, more than 50% of their budgets, on the police departments. And so they have, in Tredyffrin's case, 4, 5, 6 officers that are stationed throughout the township to get there first, to get that immediate response in place. And so I'm just wondering, in your analysis, was there any consideration to actual call response, overall emergency call response times, not simply fire response times?
The answer is no.
Okay.
The other thing I can tell you is that it is a slippery slope. Now, it's one thing for the cops to do basic EMS work. Right. Carrying an automatic external defibrillator in the trunk of their squad car, they get there first and they are trained to do CPR and use an AED, makes sense. You do not want them going into a building that's on fire without breathing apparatus. You don't want them doing that. Once or twice or 3 times a year, police officers kill themselves because they go into a building trying to be firefighters. And it's a great economic question. Why can't they do that? Now, the way you do that is you do what some cities have done and they've abandoned, and they did what they call a public safety department. They had cross-trained firefighters and firefighters. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport for a long time ran a public safety department. Okay, all of their police officers are firefighters and vice versa. Okay, you had EMT, you had paramedics carrying a gun. What happened was you can't keep up with the training anymore. The training requirements are so stiff, they're in class all the time. And in some cases, the physical requirements and the protective clothing, again, same thing. We just had President Torsten say that, and again, I'm kind of happy that Berwyn told you what they did. They can talk about excellence or not. I think that was better than for them to say that. But I think the notion of, you don't want a firefighter getting there by themselves or by 2 people and going in where one goes in by themselves. Firefighters get killed all the time doing that. So unless you want to go to a full-blown public safety police fire department and give all the guys turnout gear and put air packs in their car and do all the things they need to do, you're just looking for trouble, in my opinion. That's been tried before. I don't know of anybody that has gone forth to do that recently to combine them again. It just doesn't seem to happen. The other thing, too, is that, again, you're looking at, for the police officer, you're looking at a low-frequency, high-risk event. You're asking them to go into what's called an IDLH atmosphere, okay, immediately dangerous to life and health. Okay, they're going to a very toxic environment, even if they're just in and out right away. Okay, you're asking them to do something which I think, in a way, is to do that because you don't want to fund firefighters. I think personally it was not a good decision.
Understood. I just think it's another resource that's being brought to bear on the problem that's there. And I'm not suggesting that police officers should fight fires or vice versa.
It's a perfect, especially on the EMS side. I think. Right. The other thing too is I got probably 7 people sitting here that could probably tell you how it works today, and I'm kind of guessing. They may be doing some of the EMS stuff now, but most people I know, firefighters are happy to be first on the scene and do that. And then as soon as the fire department shows up, they're pretty happy to go back to doing policing again. But it's a good question. It's a good question.
Thank you. A couple other questions on the financial side, and some of my questions are really follow-ups on Ray's excellent questions. We think a lot alike, which is a little scary. But the $6 million increase that you quoted as the amount that would be necessary to bring the service up to the level that maybe you recommend. What staffing alternative does that contemplate?
So let me say what I said again, okay? I said that's a good budget number to use in order to get an idea of what budget might be required for a millage determination. What I've said over and over is I will not get a better number until people sit down with a workshop, until we get some policy decisions and some of this stuff to try and get a better number. So that is not an absolute number. I gave a number based upon, and again, there's no money in there for some huge, again, people hear what they want to hear, okay? There's some money in there hypothetically within the $6 million for some kind of a district staff. There's not, I mean, the only money that I've heard of is what's been around on a line item budget for a new head of the department. But the answer is that no. And the fact is that, I'm not going to try to guess any better than that. I gave a magnitude number, which I thought would get us along the way to where we needed to be. And by the way, and I know that there are a lot of academics in the room, and I'm going to tell you, my doctoral research was qualitative in nature. It wasn't quantitative in nature. And there are a lot of questions that you can answer with numbers that don't help you at all. So you can go through and say, you know what? Okay, what did we prove about response times? Is it any better than what the firefighters are telling me that happens every single day? So some of the questions here of, well, where's the research for this? Well, Some answers, if I just gave you a qualitative answer based upon a survey and based upon the quality of the people responding to the survey, would that be good enough? Or is this really a math question? Because a lot of what I did was based upon qualitative research. I did not go down the road of that kind of data because I think the data is going to change anyway. Once somebody decides what they want to do, I'd rather model that than necessarily model what we've been trying to do. I'd rather look at how the system is going to change to the better, or not even better, how it's going to work. How do we think it's better? I think the best thing we could do, and again, my boss told me once upon a time, he said, Bob, remember, more companies die due to indigestion than they do to starvation. They bite off more than they can chew. I wouldn't even tell you pick Model A. I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. Okay, but the idea of picking something, working together to get that something implemented, getting in good matrix to look at response time, back to what you said about, well, how do we know with the measurement? How do we know how we're doing? We can do that. I think it would be more effective to have a budget level and say, what would you do with that? And then predict, this is what I think is going to happen. Because in some cases, again, I didn't have to do a response time model, unless you take Paoli out, or we just put a hypothetical fire station somewhere in the district. But it didn't make a lot of sense to me when decisions were made to have a 3-station department. Now, what I think could change is when you staff that thing, that fire truck around the clock, once you do that, you can measure how response times got reduced. Because here's the other thing too. If I was the sheriff in town, I would say, don't you dare take a fire truck to a fire with one person on it. Because see, that's the other thing that happens too. Well, we had fire trucks show up. And as Tom said, yeah, but that doesn't tell the whole story. So the question is, once you standardize and say, you show up with 4 people, you show up 2 people, we do it one place 24/7. And then you start to see how that changes. As you said, it's an iterative process. I think it's much more effective. I'm not trying to dodge the question, but some of these things I think you can answer qualitatively for people that will accept that, and a lot of academics won't, but I appreciate your question.
Yeah, I mean, to frame the budget discussion, because you've presented it as the fact that you're just trying to help the public and the board understand what it means millage-wise. Mm-hmm. If you look at the budgets of the 2 fire companies together for 2023, they budget $4 million of income. That would jump it from $4 million to $10 million, right? You add $6 million to the cost. At this point,
I think the 54 people will be the whole fire department. Another $2.5 million.
well, I think what's been presented is a $6 million increase, right? And as a way of framing, what does that mean to your millage? Hmm? So we're at 4 now. If you added $6 million, we'd be at $10 million. Right now, the townships, Tredyffrin puts in $1 million. Easttown puts in $500,000, basically, round numbers, right? So all of the $6 million increase would come from Tredyffrin and Easttown. So Tredyffrin's would go from $1 million to $5.5 million. And both would go from $1 million to $5 million, and Easttown's would go from $500,000 to $2.5 million. So both townships' contribution to the fire companies would go up 5-fold, 5x what it is now. So then you look at your budget, your real estate taxes. Tredyffrin has $10 million a year in real estate taxes. If we need $4 million more in order to fund this increase, real estate taxes need to go up 40%. In Easttown's case, you guys have $5 million in real estate taxes, roughly, right? Your taxes would have to go up by $2 million. Again, a 40% increase. So net, if you need $6 million more, you're basically looking at a 5 times contribution by the taxpayers and a 40% increase in the millage. That's it in simple terms. And I think the boards have asked excellent questions as to the value proposition, and how do we deliver that to the residents of the community while at the same time fully supporting the fire company, what the fire companies actually need to deliver their service. Thank you.
Dr. Andrews, can I ask just a real detailed question here? Because I think this is an important point that Mike just asked. So when I look at your option B, which is the 54 total staff, the 18 people per shift. You would take the current system and just replace it with that structure.
Yeah, the idea is that.
Yeah, so it's not an incremental 6 million. It's
That's
that
right.
just, you're just taking the whole, you're just giving us what a new picture could look like.
That's right.
Okay,
And again, with the idea that until tonight, you really haven't had a picture.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So
But that's what
in
you
a way,
should-
I should be, well, I feel like, not quite being waterboarded here, but I do think that you're asking good questions because for the first time, you have something to evaluate. You have something to look at, and the citizens do too. The question I'd ask the citizens, is I've heard a lot about what isn't necessary. I guess the question I'd like to ask is, well, what are you willing to spend? If you think it's going to be just zero, is it just, well, we're not going to do anything, we think everything's fine, we just say, well, we might do 3 million. Part of this is, at the end of the day, they're going to do what the citizens support. And if the citizens support is, we think it's fine, it's fine. The question I would have is anybody ready, would you suggest, well, maybe we can do this much? Is there any intuitive answer that might make some sense?
Well, I guess I want to clarify, what I understood you to say was that the overall cost would have to go up by $6 million. So that includes staffing, that includes funding of all of the capital needs of the departments, that includes...
No, that's just the operational cost, and it doesn't include benefits. So I want to make that very clear. That $6 million is simply the staff cost, not inclusive of benefits, and no capital cost.
Right. It lays out what the costs are for each option, and Dr. Andrews didn't suggest which option he was recommending, right? But the option C is $5 million. Mm-hmm. Option option B is 6.5 or something like that, including benefits. But then you layer on top of that the administrative costs and the additional costs for facilities and additional equipment. And I took what you meant to mean that in order to cover all that, the additional staffing that's been identified to be needed, as well as the facilities, the investment in the firehouses, the investment in equipment, that it would be an incremental, all in, the cost would go from $4 million a year. You said you add $6 million to that, you get to $10 million a year.
The answer
That's
is
correct,
the $10 million is an all-in number, capital, everything. It's an all-in number.
Right.
Now, by the way, and I didn't check this, but it was represented to me that the police department budgets at Tredyffrin and Easttown is about $10 million a year.
In Tredyffrin, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so one of the questions becomes, other than the fact, and knowing that they're apples and bananas, okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, firefighters go 4 at a time, cops go 1 at a time, unless they're a SWAT team. Okay, so they're entirely different deployment models, okay? And so, medics go 2 at a time. I don't even know if the Tredyffrin has any 2-man patrol units, typically, unless you're in LA or someplace.
Except for training, yes.
Okay, right. FTOs, exactly right. So I think again, it's how you look at it. One of the things I said early on is that this is such a shock factor because there's been a volunteer fire company that we can thank Ben Franklin for. You've had volunteers doing this thing until the point where it's not working anymore. Okay, the question would be, unless you said the manpower is very different, there's never been a Tredyffrin volunteer police department. There hasn't been an Easttown volunteer police department.
Understood.
So the question becomes, why are we willing to spend $10 million for law enforcement when somebody comes and says, look, fire and EMS is as important on the day you need it, and we think that we're probably looking at a similar size. Can people get their head around that? Because it's all about the increase. Well, okay, but you're looking at a major career. That's why we said this is a major shift in thinking. It's a major shift looking at it. There's a shock value to that. But I don't know that if you said, do we really think the fire and EMS system should have a much less budget than the police department? In a lot of cases, in most towns, they're fairly similar. It just hasn't been that way here. It's just an observation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other public questions or comments?
Hi, my name's Brian Zimmerman. I'm actually a Phoenixville resident, but I'm the executive director at Radnor Fire Company. I want to take the opportunity to thank Easttown and Tredyffrin for this opportunity to look and prioritize fire and EMS in the township. Well, Radnor is a small part of that. We've had a strong working relationship with Tredyffrin Township over the years, and at the very beginning of this, affirmed our partnership in this process to help any way we can. And again, on behalf of Radnor Fire Company, we just want to thank you for undertaking this momentous task, to say the least. And whether there's a new entity or we continue where we're going, on behalf of Radnor Fire Company, we're here to continue that partnership and help any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments tonight?
Good evening. Just a couple things. I think, oh, sorry, didn't say my name. Eamon Brzunis. Eamon Brzunis. E-A-M-O-N. Last name Brzunis, B as in boy, R-A-Z-U-N-A-S. 4 or
Just
5.
like it sounds.
Yeah, exactly. Just like it sounds. 405 Redcoat Lane, Assistant Chief with Berwyn Fire Company. I'm a 25-year volunteer. I think the big thing, obviously thank you to Dr. Andrews for his efforts with this report. As Executive Director Zimmerman talked about, this is a big task that both the townships and the staffs took on. It's not always an exciting thing to talk about big dollar amounts, whether it's the fire company, stormwater, or other issues that come before you. So we appreciate you continuing to bring this to the forefront. To put some perspective on this, in 2008, 2006-2008 timeframe, we went through this process. Similar report was done, nowhere near the extent of detail, and that report never saw the light of day. So just the fact that we've gotten a lot of these big ticket items on the table and started that discussion, or really continued in a lot of ways, is a big deal. So thank you for that. Tonight we're here with a lot of volunteers from not only Berwyn Fire Company, but from Paley Fire Company, Radnor Fire Company. As we start to really have these discussions about staffing, both townships really need to think about that. I'm 41 years old, it's hard to believe. I like going to fire calls. I don't like people having an emergency, but when called upon, I like to do it. Jay Wilson, I spent some time outside with, who's an assistant chief. Jay's got a few years on me, sorry Jay, but he's another one that likes doing it. And a lot of us feel that way. And we want to get to the point that the funding for us is not a concern. We do not want to do, Paley does a resale. We do a turkey raffle. Some of the stuff we like to do, it's fun, but at the end of the day, our volunteers need to be focusing on response and training. And that's where we need to go. That is the ultimate goal. And we've talked about staffing extensively. I know Paley Fire Company's been doing that. Berwyn Fire Company's been doing that as it relates to Tredyffrin and Easttown Township. So the more focus we can, again, as we're thinking about these big numbers, the better. This is a plan. This is not happening next year. Nothing Dr. Andrews talked about or I've heard from the supervisors is stating this is all happening in one fell swoop next year, or quite frankly, 3 years from now. This is going to be a building process, I can tell you that. At a minimum, we're probably looking at a 3 to 5 year time frame, at least in my mind, my professional opinion, as I look at this. So, yes, no one likes taxes. Democrats don't like them, Republicans don't like them. I don't care what you are, what you think. Nobody likes paying for them. But at the end of the day, when you call 911, you want to make sure an ambulance and a fire truck or the police are at your residence when you have an emergency. So again, as a community, let's really just keep that in mind. Really, why are we here? What are we looking at? As Dr. Andrews talked about, yeah, sure, there's a little bit of sticker shock because we're showing the all-in cost to this, and it's like, holy cow, this could really be a big thing. But only we have the opportunity where all 3 fire companies and Tredyffrin and the 2 fire companies that service Easttown is to come together, which really starts tomorrow, and start to kind of work through the minutia. Okay, what are we doing first? Do we hire the fire chief? Do we not do that? Do we get 4 paid staff at Paley Fire Company next year full time? Do we get 6 at Berwyn? I mean, these are some of the discussions that have to follow what's occurred here tonight. So again, we're not going to solve all the problems next year, but we're continuing to lay important groundwork for the future to ensure the success of all 3 fire companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public questions or comments? All right. Oh.
Just sitting there thinking about this, shouldn't we start with establishing what the staffing model ought to be? Like, how many career people, how many volunteers do we think that we could get? What are let's assume we keep the 3 stations, what each station should look like, and then you could overlay, well, how then do we coordinate all of that? How do we make that most efficient? How do we coordinate the EMS billing? How do we coordinate the fundraising? And, start with, okay, how many people and what equipment do we need at each of these 3 stations? And then say, okay, now how do we do that? I don't know, just think.
All right. All right. Last call for questions. All right. Well, this is a great starting point. And
we have one more.
Oh, we do? All right. Mr. Coonan.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Coonan.
Am I audible? I was curious about one point that someone made, asking the citizens how much money they're willing to spend. It seems to me that that's not.
Mr. Coonan, we can't hear you. Can you speak closer to the microphone, please?
What you really need to ask. No, I'm sorry?
We can't hear you. Can you speak closer to your microphone?
And be sure to say your address as well for the court reporter.
Road, Wayne, Pennsylvania, Tredyffrin Township. Am I close enough now? Can you hear? Am I audible? Hello?
That's a little better. Yeah, we're having trouble hearing you, so.
Well, I'm having trouble being. I don't know why this is a new computer. I need to know where the microphone is. Can you hear me? I'd really like
Mr. Coonan, unfortunately, the sound just isn't coming through. Perhaps you could reach out to the board. You could reach out to me. I think you have my contact. And I can help answer your question and put you in contact with Dr. Andrews. Any other questions tonight? All right, well, this is a great starting point. We have a lot of work ahead, and this is just the beginning. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, all in favor? We are adjourned.